Vanessa woke up this morning in a great mood, but as soon as she got to work, it was gone. By chance, she had witnessed the manager of the clothing shop where she worked humiliating a colleague in public. "Don't you have enough sense to put the goods away properly?" In a voice trembling with anger, the boss asked, "Why so sloppy?" He glanced at the display case. Vanessa furrowed her eyebrows. Everything was displayed perfectly. "He's picking on her again," she thought unhappily. Mr. Sven had a reputation for being a real tyrant, constantly picking on employees and making remarks to them on and off. The man seemed to literally feed on the suffering of others. Many people couldn't stand the pressure and quit. Vanessa herself would have been happy to change jobs. However, her husband and especially her mother-in-law were against such a step, considering it too risky for the family budget, and therefore had to endure. "I'm sorry, I'll fix it now," quietly said the employee and hurried to the shop window. As soon as she was gone, Mr. Swan spotted Vanessa's next victim and began to approach her. "Craig," the manager shook his hands, "and you've just now turned up at the workplace." "So it's only been 1 minute," Vanessa said calmly. The manager was ready to choke with indignation. Then he took in more air and gave out an angry tirade. And he said that today, as a punishment for her lateness, she would not have a lunch break. So it was no surprise that Vanessa returned home in a terrible state of mind. She'd been on her feet all day, never sat down, and since her boss was always looking after her, there was no distraction. She was welcomed home by her mother-in-law, who sat with a few albums, reminiscing about times long gone by. Once her life was like a fairy tale, a rich husband, beautiful clothes, constant parties, traveling. However, when her husband passed away, that era came to an end. Mrs. Torrey did not particularly delve into his affairs, all entrusted to a few managers who successfully plundered the budget. And so the business went bust. All the major assets were spent, and what was left was barely enough to maintain the same standard of living. "How happy we were then," theatrically sighed mother-in-law, wiping away an invisible tear. "Don't worry, we'll get everything back," Matthew said confidently, putting his arm around her shoulders. When Vanessa's husband started to manage the firm, everything was already hopelessly lost. So the only thing he had managed to do as owner was to sell the company to another person, but on the condition that he would remain as an employee. Matthew and his mother were convinced that they could still get the business back. Vanessa often heard such conversations, but she tried not to enter into them. She had her own opinions. She was very hesitant about the idea because her husband had been an ordinary employee for several years and had never been promoted. He talked a lot, but did too little to make his and his mother's dreams a reality. "Vanessa," Matthew spotted his wife and immediately went over to her. "I have a small favor to ask of you." "Would you?" He couldn't continue because he was coughing erratically. "Are you ill?" she asked worriedly, touching his forehead. "I don't think I have a fever." Not at the moment. Matthew began to complain. This afternoon it was over 40. "Can you believe it, Vanessa? You have to come to my office tomorrow to pick up my bonus. I'm afraid I won't make it to work tomorrow." Is it that bad, she wondered. Poor Matthew had been in bed all day today. It was only towards evening that he was able to get up when his fever had gone down a bit. The mother-in-law supported her son. "So you go tomorrow, Vanessa?" "Well, if that's the case, of course I'll go. I have the day off tomorrow." "That's wonderful," the husband glowed. Until that day, Vanessa had been to her husband's office only a couple of times, and even then she waited for him in the hall, and she had never even entered the office. Life in the company was booming. At first, no one paid any attention to her. The secretary was on the phone with someone. Employees were rushing back and forth, passing documents to each other. As Vanessa walked deep into the office, she accidentally touched a flower, which fell to the floor with a clatter. Then all eyes turned to her. They started to look unfriendly. Some even whispered muffledly. A girl came up to her and, without a word, silently put the barely surviving flower back in its place. Then she realized that it wasn't the flower at all. Everyone kept looking back at her strangely. Vanessa felt very uncomfortable. She didn't know these people, but she felt guilty in front of them, even though there was nothing to repent of. Overcome with embarrassment, she approached the young girl to find out where she could get her husband's money. She answered, but with a look on her face that made Vanessa even more uncomfortable. On stiff legs, she went to the principal's office. When the door closed behind her and the director's chair swung round so that she could see the man sitting in it, Vanessa almost shrieked in horror. She took a deep breath and clenched her hands into fists. A few meters away from her, as if on a throne, sat the woman who had once been her high school nightmare. She had made her teenage life a living hell. "Why are you standing there?" grinned that devilish smile that Vanessa remembered from high school. "Sit down." If she didn't sit down now, she would surely faint. Vanessa could barely contain the feelings that were ready to burst out. At this moment, she felt again like a defenseless schoolgirl who was about to be humiliated. Memories hit her like a hurricane. Here she is standing in her brand new blouse, and that classmate Linda is mocking her poverty. "What are those rags you're wearing?" Linda pointed at her squeamishly. "Did you go to the flea market again?" And after these words, the whole class burst into loud laughter, while Vanessa tried to hold back her tears. "My blouse is fine," she tried to defend herself, but it was very weak. "My mum bought it for me in the shop." "Who are you kidding?" the rich classmate continued to mock. "Where did you get the money for the shop?" This memory gave Vanessa's body goosebumps. She frantically looked at her appearance, trying to find some flaw in it and anticipate what Linda would say. "Would you like some tea?" she said with feigned courtesy. "But be careful, or you'll get a stain." She flapped her eyelashes innocently. At that moment, her memory threw up another memory that she desperately wanted to forget. It was her senior year of high school, and Vanessa had already started working so that she wouldn't have to ask her mother for money to buy her own clothes. She worked very hard and bought herself a beautiful dress that she went straight to school in. That day she received a lot of compliments, which made Linda very angry. Then a classmate spilled brown paint on her desk and pushed Vanessa there. The delicate pink fabric was immediately stained. She didn't immediately feel that something was wrong. She sat through a whole lesson and then walked around the school with a big brown stain. After that incident, everyone, from little to big, started to make fun of her. Even the first graders pointed their fingers at her. Her classmates even came up with a hurtful nickname. After this incident, Vanessa cried all night, begging her mother to change school, not wanting to return after such humiliation. But her mother insisted that she finish her studies. There were 2 months left, but those 2 months were hell. Vanessa cried almost every day. "I'm going to drop out," Vanessa said through gritted teeth. It was becoming more and more difficult to keep her composure with each passing minute. Linda, on the other hand, reveled in the situation. She had only recently become the director of the company, when her father had bought the company and offered her favorite daughter a high position. A couple of days ago, she had been bored and had asked Matthew to send Vanessa to her for the money so that she could have some fun. "Catch it, then." Linda threw the envelope of money at her, which, if Vanessa hadn't put her hands out, would have hit her in the face. The envelope fell to the floor. The money scattered. Vanessa felt her right eye start to twitch, just like in school during the most stressful moments. "What are you looking at?" Linda smirked. "Come on, collect what your husband has earned." Vanessa felt herself blushing. She sank to the floor and began to collect the money. The feeling of humiliation, familiar from school, came over her again. "Good girl. Now get out of here," Linda said contemptuously, leaning back in her chair. Vanessa ran out of the office with great speed. She started looking for the washroom to clean herself up. "Wait." Vanessa heard a voice behind her and looked round. An elderly woman with a mop in her hands was catching up with her. When they got to the same place, the older woman whispered to her that she needed to talk and would be waiting outside. "What did you want to tell me?" Vanessa asked as soon as they met in the backyard. "Oh, my girl, these scoundrels have completely messed with your head." The older woman shook her hands, looking around quietly. Vanessa looked at her incomprehensibly. Then the old woman told her the story in detail that her husband and former classmate had deliberately staged this spectacle to humiliate her. "I heard it all myself," the cleaning lady thumped her chest. Vanessa didn't know what to say to that. She couldn't understand why Matthew had done that to her. They often locked themselves in the new boss's office. The cleaning lady lowered her voice, suggesting cheating. Vanessa returned home completely exhausted from the experience. "Your money." Vanessa handed her husband an envelope, Matthew was very pleased. He immediately started counting his earnings. His eyebrows rose and he nodded approvingly. "Thank you, darling," he smiled, kissing her on the cheek. "How's your health?" Vanessa asked, remembering what he had said yesterday about being ill. "Fine," Matthew replied cheerfully. Vanessa tried to find signs of infidelity in his behavior, but he behaved as usual. "I met your boss." Vanessa tried to speak calmly, although the memories of meeting Linda caused strong negative emotions. "Did you know she was my classmate?" "Did you?" "Amazing," Matthew was surprised. "It must have been nice to meet after all these years." "It wasn't," Vanessa exclaimed sharply. "It was Linda. I told you about her." "Wow," whistled her husband. "What a small world." Vanessa didn't seem to have any reason to distrust Matthew, so she just nodded and moved on. At that moment, her mother-in-law, who had been silently knitting until then, intervened. "Well done, son," she said approvingly. "At least someone in this house earns money, and not constantly complaining about fatigue." It was a clear hint to Vanessa, because she had recently shared with her mother-in-law her worries about her shop. "Thanks, Mum," Matthew smiled, carefully tucking the envelope into his pocket. "Vanessa will never make that kind of money in her life," said the older woman wryly. Though what was there to be surprised about? Who went to school for what? Some people are destined to be on the dole all their lives. And some, she patted her son's shoulder, to work with their heads. To Vanessa's surprise, her husband didn't stand up for her, but supported his mother, laughing with her. It hurt her feelings deeply and finally ruined her mood. Her appetite disappeared and Vanessa retreated to the bedroom, closing herself in. Her husband had a habit of falling asleep on the sofa in front of the television, so she often spent nights alone. And left to herself, Vanessa began to prepare for tomorrow to avoid complaints from her bosses. She decided to come in early. Sleep was not coming. Her mind was constantly spinning with thoughts of today. Every time she went back to the meeting with Linda and blamed herself for silently enduring it, for not being able to defend herself. "It was just like high school," she said sadly, leaning back on the pillow. From the kitchen came the cheerful voices of her husband and mother-in-law, which made it even harder. She wished that tomorrow would come and she could go to work, where she would be so busy that she would have no energy left for sad thoughts. Trying to distract herself, Vanessa decided to surf social media. She rarely went there, and the last time she posted photos was before she got married. Looking at the fresh pictures of her classmates, she sadly noticed that many of them had already become mothers. This topic was painful for her. She really wanted a child. She was pregnant twice, but each time she miscarried. If I had a baby, it would be so much easier now, Vanessa thought before falling asleep. Even though she arrived at work early the next day, and had even laid out her clothes to the manager's liking, he still had grievances, which he had voiced since the morning. "In the last month, I've been short of $500,000 worth of goods." After these words, Vanessa's eyes widened with surprise. It turns out that all this time, secretly from the staff, was conducted a large-scale inspection, which revealed a lot of irregularities. "You think I won't realize that one of you is stealing things and selling them at his own price?" The boss continued his tirade, constantly throwing angry glances in Vanessa's direction. She didn't know how to react to this. Never in her life had she ever stolen. But could that be conveyed to Mr. Swan, who disliked her so much? Looking around, Vanessa began to think of who among her colleagues might be up to something like this. Lucy, perhaps, Vanessa thought, glancing at her partner who worked weekends. They weren't particularly friendly, as Vanessa didn't understand many of her colleagues' life principles and values. However, she knew for a fact that Lucy was not known for her honesty, and therefore she might well be involved in this case. "Vanessa, hold up. At the end of the meeting," the boss said, and his eyes glittered slyly. The rest of the staff hurried away to avoid the manager's eyes. "Did you think you could get away with it?" The man squinted his eyes as he approached closely. Although he pretended to be an angry boss, but in his heart he was jubilant. After all, he finally had the opportunity to dismiss an unwanted employee. He hadn't liked Vanessa from the very first day, but he didn't dare to remove her at once, because the shop owner had conducted the interview personally. "Mr. Swan," I swear to you, it wasn't me, Vanessa Craig protested at once. You don't try to trick me. Who then, if not you? Grinned the manager. Vanessa bit her lip nervously, considering whether or not to tell him about her suspicions about Lucy. On the one hand, she was sure of her reasoning, but on the other, there was no evidence to accuse the man. That's what I thought, that you had nothing to say. Mr. Sven smirked in response to her silence. Go and pack your things. I don't need thieves in my shop. Vanessa gathered herself up, wiping away her tears. The injustice choked her, but there was nothing she could do. When the news of her dismissal reached home, it was a real scandal. Vanessa, are you out of your mind? The husband's eyes widened. How could you even let this happen? It's very hard to get a job now. You can't get anywhere. She had hoped that she would feel better at home, but on the contrary, it became even worse. Instead of support, all she got was recriminations. What's my fault? I told you I was unfairly dismissed. Again, she repeated in a voice trembling with resentment. Do you have no language to negotiate with the bosses? Continued to press her husband. If you were not guilty, you would not have been fired. What, you embezzled a few thousand and you don't want to admit it? From such insolence, Vanessa was ready to boil. How can you even say that? She was outraged. I've never taken anything from anyone else in my life. Her husband rolled his eyes. What are you going to do now? Live off me. I'm not going to support you. Mother-in-law, watching the bickering son and daughter-in-law, only smirked. It was literally written all over her face. I told you, she's not capable of anything. The old woman did not think to support her. Unable to bear the pressure, Vanessa burst into tears again. Quickly, so that her husband would not notice her hysterics, she wanted to slip into the bedroom, but Matthew blocked her way. I just remembered. We need a second cleaner in the office, he said. The first one's past her prime, so we need an assistant. So you can come and talk to the boss tomorrow. Since you know each other, maybe she'll take you on as an acquaintance. The prospect of working under Linda made her body goosebumps. If in the 10 minutes they'd seen each other, she'd nearly given her a nervous breakdown. What could happen in a whole day? And in a month? Vanessa shook her head vigorously. No, I'd rather look for another option. And tell me, are you completely stupid? Her husband grinned. What other option are you going to look for? You'd think you'd be able to do anything but serve clothes and scrub floors. Vanessa swallowed her resentment so as not to aggravate the already tense situation. How am I supposed to work for her? She said in a completely colorless voice. You know I suffered at school because of her. You'll work like a sweetheart if you want to have money, remarked the mother-in-law, who suddenly appeared nearby. Mother and son began to push hard. Vanessa finally gave in, agreeing to talk to Linda Rose tomorrow. The interview she'd been encouraged to go to was more like another act of humiliation. The former classmate had a lot of fun talking. I didn't tell everyone at school to study hard so that they wouldn't have to work as cleaners. Linda grinned. Your example is proof of that. At school, Vanessa was good, even almost excellent. The only B was in maths. She had never been very good at it. Linda graduated with a gold medal, but it was no secret that her daddy had bought her. To keep you busy, I've already thought of an assignment for you. The boss smiled caustically, and in the same second knocked over the coffee that the secretary had just brewed. Clean it up, make the floor shine. And Vanessa started cleaning. And the boss didn't leave her office, but continued to watch the scene. Vanessa came out of there as red as a cancer. Feelings of shame and resentment literally devoured her from the inside. Is money worth such humiliation? She thought to herself. Poor girl, they've driven you away. An elderly technician spoke in an affectionate voice, handing her tea. Here, drink it, have a rest. I've also brought a cake, eat it. It looks like you haven't eaten today. Thank you very much, Vanessa said in a heartfelt voice, not expecting such care. She was really being pushed to the limit today. Linda had hinted to the staff that the new cleaner could be put to good use, and everyone had taken advantage of it immediately. She crossed paths with her husband a couple of times in the corridor, but Matthew strictly forbade her to tell anyone that they were married, or even to go near him. I thought everyone knew that I was your wife, Vanessa said, confused when he caught her in the empty corridor. Even if you did, you don't need to be reminded of that. Matthew cut him off. Relationships are forbidden in our company. After that conversation, she tried to keep her eyes downcast and pretend they didn't know each other. Still, she didn't want to believe that her husband could be unfaithful to her. He wouldn't have offered me a job in his office if he was having an affair with someone else, Vanessa decided and settled down. The new job was taking a lot more energy than the old one. Not only was she forced to clean the office to a high gloss every day, but she was also under a lot of moral pressure. The team quickly realized that the new technician was also a person who could be harassed, so they treated her badly. The only person she could talk to was an elderly colleague who asked to be called Caroline. She often felt sorry for her, cheered her up, and at the end of the day, when the staff finally went home, it was not uncommon for them to chat about life over a cup of tea and some cake. On one such day, Caroline told her story. "And I was married once. Happy, raising a daughter," the old woman reminisced. "And then I went through a bad patch. First, my husband died of oncology. Then my daughter. A couple of months after she gave birth, she left me a grandson, Alex." "And his father?" Vanessa asked. "What about the father?" Caroline shook her hands. "He didn't want a son. And a couple of months after his daughter died, he disappeared. So now I'm raising the boy on my own. He's very sweet." As if to confirm her words, the next day she brought her grandson with her to work. "And you believe they closed the daycare center for quarantine," Caroline said. "Where am I going to put Alex? Only to take him with me." Vanessa immediately managed to find a common language with the boy. Alex turned out to be kind, well-mannered. He patiently waited for his grandmother in the pantry. Once she even gave him a chocolate bar, which finally earned his love. So the grandson came to work during the week, and no one even noticed him. At the end of the day, when Caroline thought everyone had left, she would let her grandson play in the office. The boy somehow didn't realize on his own how he ended up in the principal's office. The first thing he saw, there was a wallet that was lying right on the floor. He remembered how once they, walking with his grandmother, found the purse, and she gave it to a man who was very grateful. And that was when Alex first learned what a good deed was, and he wanted to be praised again. Running up to the purse, the boy took it in his hands, but suddenly money, business cards, and pictures spilled out of it. "Alex, where did you get lost?" Vanessa's voice came from the corridor, looking for him. Seeing that the door to Linda's office was open, she went in and found the child there. "What are you doing here?" she wondered. "I found the wallet," shouted Alex, pointing at his find. When Vanessa came closer and bent down, her eyes fell on a photo lying a little further away. It depicted a man and a woman. They were embracing. More specifically, it was Linda and her husband Matthew. Vanessa immediately sank to the floor, covering her mouth with her hand. "So it's true then," she muttered mentally. Her body began to tremble as she realized that the spouse she told about all her suffering had cheated on her with an intruder. "Honey, go to Grandma. I'll give her the missing items myself," Vanessa said, barely holding back her tears. She did not want to frighten the child, and therefore gave vent to her feelings only when his footsteps died down in the corridor. She was in unbearable pain now. Looking around, she felt nausea rising in her throat. Matthew had probably cheated on her in this very office where she was crying so furiously. Caroline's words about how they often locked themselves in here echoed in her head, and her lungs collapsed. Suddenly, there were laughing voices in the corridor. Vanessa immediately rose to her feet and wiped away her tears. Apparently, she and Caroline weren't the only ones who had decided that the office was empty. Her husband appeared on the threshold of the office, putting his arm around Linda's waist. In his boss's hand was a half-empty bottle of wine. "Vanessa," in complete shock, the husband said, moving away from his mistress, "why are you still here? Shouldn't you have gone home a long time ago?" "You don't have to pretend," in a hoarse voice she said, throwing the purse with the photo on the table. "I know. You're having an affair right behind my back." The man took a deep breath, putting his hands behind his head. This wasn't how he was going to tell his wife about their relationship, and Linda was terribly pleased. Once again, she had managed to hurt her rival's feelings. Matthew began to mumble. "I don't know what to say." But Linda interrupted him sternly. "You're so pathetic and worthless that your husband left you," she grinned. Vanessa realized that she couldn't keep quiet any longer. It was unlikely that after this she would be left at work, and therefore she had nothing to lose. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Why are you always trying to hurt or humiliate me? What in your life are you so desperate to make up for?" "What the hell are you talking about? You're insane." Linda clearly didn't understand her. "What I'm saying is that, despite all the tinsel you surround yourself with," Vanessa continued, "you are still a weak, insecure person who tries to elevate yourself by humiliating others." Linda immediately flared up and told her to get out immediately and never come back to the office again. "And tell the old woman to leave with you," the supervisor hissed. What was Caroline's fault? Vanessa was indignant. She didn't care anymore. But she didn't want the old woman to lose her job because of her. "You should have watched your puppy," Linda repeated even more angrily. There was no point in saying anything, so Vanessa left immediately. She realized that she would no longer live under the same roof with her husband, so she went to get her things, praying that her mother-in-law would be busy with her work and would not notice her. "Ah, our cleaning lady is back," grinned her mother-in-law as she greeted her at the entrance. "Where's Matthew?" Vanessa took a deep breath, trying to calm herself down. "He's late at work," she answered briefly. "My poor son," wailed the old woman. "That's how hard he has to work to get his company back." "She's playing her favorite record again," Vanessa thought irritably as she stealthily went into her room. She indiscriminately began to throw the most necessary things into her traveling bag and got through it pretty quickly. "Are you going somewhere?" Matthew's mother caught up with her like a kite on the way out. "Away from here," Vanessa answered, opening the door. But her mother-in-law blocked her way. "What's that supposed to mean?" she exclaimed almost hysterically. "That's what it means," whispered Vanessa, who was getting quite annoyed with the whole situation. "Your son is cheating on me, and that's why I'm not going to stay in the same house with him." Vanessa pushed her mother-in-law away and walked out the door. Behind her there was a quiet sound. "You found out," which made her grin nervously. Of course his mother knew. Matthew had never kept secrets from her. What an idiot I am, Vanessa thought bitterly. Just as she was about to dial her friend's number to ask to spend the night, she got a call from Caroline. "Vanessa, Vanessa," Alex's crying voice sounded on the other end. "I'm listening to you, my good man. What's wrong? Why are you crying?" she said excitedly. "Grandma has a heart condition. They took her to the hospital." "I'm scared," the child began to whimper. At that moment her heart sank into her heels. "Where are you now?" "I'll come to you," she promised. "I'm at the hospital too," Alex answered. Vanessa started to call a taxi. It turned out that after Vanessa left work, Linda made a scandal to the elderly cleaner and then fired her without explanation. The woman was very upset, from which coming home felt bad and then even fainted. Her grandson, although very scared, ran to the neighbors who called an ambulance. Vanessa got there quickly and together with Alex waited for the doctor. The boy was not himself. He was terribly frightened, and she had no way to calm him down. When Vanessa saw the doctor coming out of the operating theater, she sent Alex to get some water and walked over to him. "How's Mrs. Caroline?" she asked immediately. The patient had suffered a heart attack, but now her condition was stabilized, the doctor summarized briefly. "Can I see her?" "Yes, but only for a little while. She's still weak." Vanessa cheered Alex up and together they hurried to her grandmother's room. When Vanessa saw Caroline, she felt her heart ache. The older woman was very pale. She looked very small and defenseless in the hospital room. The boy, too, did not realize at first how he should behave. He cast a worried glance at Vanessa, as if asking if he could go to his grandmother. "Don't you want to give me a hug?" came Caroline's faint voice, and Alex immediately ran to her. Vanessa didn't stay in the ward for long. Caroline had asked her to stay with her and look after her grandson until she got better. "Oh, if that ever happens," she grinned sadly when her grandson came out. "I don't even think about it," Vanessa exclaimed. "Of course she'll be fine." But Caroline wasn't so positive. She had a premonition that she didn't have much time left. Therefore, she needed to settle all her affairs as soon as possible. Above all, she thought of her grandson, who had no one but her. Thank God that this girl has come into our lives. I hope she takes care of Alex, Caroline thought, and it made her feel a little better. The next day, she had a notary to draw up a will in Vanessa's name. She didn't even have the slightest doubt in her mind that she would handle the estate properly, and when the time was right, she'd pass it all on to Alex. Living in a new house left Vanessa no opportunity to be sad about her broken marriage. All her thoughts were occupied with Alex, who needed care, and Caroline, whom they visited every day. If it weren't for her husband's calls, which she preferred not to answer, she would have forgotten he even existed. Her mind was preoccupied with other things. When she and Alex were going to visit Caroline as usual, she got a call from the hospital. "I'm so sorry for your loss. A patient passed away a few minutes ago," said a monotone voice. Vanessa collapsed onto the couch next to her and was speechless. The thing she feared most in the world had happened, and tonight she was going to have a hard conversation with Alex. She'd cried into her pillow beforehand so she wouldn't scare him again. She saw how hard and scary it was for him. So after the conversation, she hugged him tightly, promising that she would never leave him. "Is Grandma with Mum now?" the boy said quietly. "Yes, darling," Vanessa answered, discreetly wiping away a tear. "They will look after you together now." The funeral arrangements fell to Vanessa. Caroline didn't have many friends and acquaintances, so the ceremony was quite modest. All this time the girl was near the child, so that he would not feel abandoned. Alex held firm like a real man, and Vanessa was very proud of it. When all the words were said, and Caroline's body was buried, a strange man walked towards her with a leisurely gait. "Are you the one living in the deceased's house now?" he asked her head-on. "Yes," Vanessa said, confused. "And who are you?" "I'm her son-in-law and Alex's father." The man thumped his chest. He waved at his son, but he hid behind Vanessa's back. She remembered Caroline's stories. She had never had good feelings for a man who ran away from his son. "I'll give you a few days to move out and give me the keys," he ordered. Vanessa could barely contain herself from such insolence. She handed Alex to her neighbor and continued the conversation with his father. "What's your name?" she asked. "William." "Now, William," Vanessa began, "I'm not giving you anything. Caroline asked me to take care of her grandson, and I know you don't want him. So don't get your hopes up, you're not getting anything," Vanessa said, noticing his pupils dilating with anger. She exhaled, noting to herself that there were a lot of people here, and it was unlikely that he would use force on her, even though he looked threatening. "This is my house." Alex's father raised his voice to a shout. "This guy has no one but me." "You can think what you want," Vanessa said, "but I won't even let you on my doorstep," she added contemptuously. Vanessa remembered that this man had been deprived of his parental rights for drunkenness a few years ago. She cringed, noting that he still reeked of alcohol. "No, I won't let him anywhere near her," she promised herself. "I'll sue you," William said threateningly, and then he left. The next day, Vanessa went to a notary to confirm her right to the house. At the same time, she began to deal with the issue of child custody. She was worried that Alex might be given to his father, and then nothing good would happen to the boy. "Don't worry. His parental rights will not be restored," she was assured at the notary's office, and she was able to breathe a little. Vanessa was worried that she might not be granted custody, as she was still considered unemployed. However, a miracle happened. She was allowed to take custody, as long as she tried to create all the conditions so that the child would not feel unhappy. Immediately after his grandmother's funeral, the boy became withdrawn, practically stopped talking. His own father tried to contact him a couple of times, but it frightened him even more. Vanessa even went with Alex to a psychologist, but she was told that she just needed time to come to his senses, and of course love, so that he would not feel lonely. One day when Vanessa was picking Alex up from daycare, she received another call from her husband. She finally decided to answer it. There was a sneer on the other end of the line. "You still deigning to pick up the phone?" "I've been very busy," Vanessa answered. "I hope you're calling to negotiate a divorce," she grinned. "Yes. It's long overdue to end our marriage. I'll finally be happy with Linda," the man added deliberately to piss her off. However, Vanessa didn't care at all. "Then I suggest we settle this matter tomorrow," without paying attention to the last phrase, Vanessa said, and hung up the phone. Matthew felt victorious. Everything was going according to his plan. He was almost rid of Vanessa. All he had to do was to marry Linda, and then as a wedding present ask his father-in-law for the company he'd been dreaming of for years. "Well done, son," his mother said approvingly, rubbing her hands together in impatience. "I knew you would be able to get your father's business back. You're so talented." Only the prospective bride was of a different opinion. Linda had no intention of marrying Matthew. She only wanted him to annoy a former classmate. Even now, when she saw his call, she put her phone on silent and threw it in her bag as she continued to have dinner with another man. Was it something important? The person she was talking to asked. "No, not at all," she grinned. "Just one idle employee who can't make a move without me." Linda often thought it was time to end this story. She'd had enough of Vanessa, and she didn't want Matthew around anymore, especially when there were so many interesting men walking around her. Meanwhile, Vanessa's life was slowly getting better. Alex was coming round, and then she realized that it was time to look for a new job, because it was wrong to sit idle any longer. Vanessa found several suitable options, and even went to the interview, as her phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but something inside her told her that she should take the call. "Hello, Vanessa," came a pleasant male voice. "Good afternoon. Do I know you?" she asked at once. "This is James, the owner of the clothing shop Dream. We met a year and a half ago. You remember, I hired you," he explained to Vanessa. She remembered. True, it seemed to her that all these events had taken place in some other, past life, because now everything was completely different. "It's come to my attention that you've been unfairly dismissed, so I want to rectify the situation. Can you come over now?" Vanessa was confused. She was sure she'd never go back there again. And now there were other people waiting for her. The girl realized that the right thing to do was to answer no. But she couldn't help admitting that she loved the shop where she worked and would be genuinely happy to return there. "Okay, I'll be right there," she exhaled and changed her route. When she arrived at the shop, she was greeted personally by James. He explained that he had done his own investigation and had discovered who was actually guilty of stealing and reselling the merchandise. "And who is that?" Vanessa asked, who had her own suspicions. "It's not even one person," grinned the owner. "They worked in pairs, your partner Lucy and the manager Mr. Swan. But don't worry. Both of them have already been sacked and a case has been opened against them." Vanessa nodded, noting that she'd been right in her hunch after all. "If you'd already found the culprits, why did you call me in?" she asked a reasonable question. "I want you to go back to work," James explained. "I know you used to be good at your job. The customers were happy with you. That's why I want to offer you the position of manager." Vanessa stared at him unblinking. She never thought she would ever be offered a promotion. "I accept," she answered almost immediately, which earned her a satisfied smile from the owner. At first, Vanessa was worried that she wouldn't be able to cope with total responsibility, but she soon became convinced of the opposite. She was treated well by the staff. Even in such a high position, she did not behave arrogantly. After the oppressive Mr. Swan, who kept everyone in fear, Vanessa's leadership was to everyone's liking. The improved atmosphere in the shop seemed to be felt by the customers as well. Sales had started to increase over the past week, which couldn't have pleased the shopkeeper more. James, who had previously relied on the manager, was now a frequent visitor to his shop. One day, a new employee ran up to Mrs. Vanessa with panic in her eyes. "We've got a problem. Iris couldn't come into work. Her son broke his leg, and we've got a real emergency. We can't cope." "Okay," Vanessa said calmly. "As I recall, we have another employee who is on holiday. Let's give him a call." "Yes, I suppose we could," Vicky said thoughtfully. "But her father died the day before yesterday," she stammered, and Vanessa let her not continue. "Okay, I see. Then I'll take the counter myself," she decided without hesitation. "Wow," whispered Vicky Brown. "Where did you ever see a boss working on equal terms with everyone else like that?" But Vanessa didn't care. First of all, she was responsible for making sure the shop ran well, and it didn't matter how she ensured it did. James was watching this scene closely. Vanessa had managed to surprise him. She showed not only excellent leadership skills, but also humanity, which was especially rare in today's world, and therefore very valuable. At the end of the day, Vanessa unraveled her tight bundle, and her long hair fell in waves over her shoulders. At that moment, she caught James's gaze, which was fixed on her. It wasn't the look of a boss who wanted to catch his employee in a mistake, but the look of a man who usually gave pretty women the same look. Vanessa lowered her eyes first. Her face flushed with color, and since then she often began to catch her boss's glances, noting that she even liked it. For the first time in a long time, Vanessa was able to look at herself and remember that she was, in fact, an attractive woman. Vanessa decided to take advantage of the fact that she works in a clothing shop. So at the end of the day, she asked some of the consultants to stay late to help her choose a dress. The next day, Vanessa was shining brighter than the sun. "You look gorgeous," James said. "Thank you," Vanessa replied, embarrassed. "Why don't we have dinner together tonight?" Spending the evening with her boss, Vanessa realized that he was an incredibly interesting man who was immediately likable. "God, I think I'm losing my head," she had to admit to herself. James talked about himself. So Vanessa learned that he was already married, but a couple of months ago divorced his wife because of infidelity. "Yeah, that sounds familiar," she smiled sadly. "Have you been cheated on too?" James asked. "Yes." The pleasant, confidential atmosphere put Vanessa in the mood for honesty, and so she told James about all the events that had happened to her since she'd been fired. It was as if she were reliving it all over again. At the end, James sat there completely confused. "I'm sorry I spilled it all out on you," Vanessa said guiltily. No. James intercepted her hand and squeezed it in his. "I'm surprised that such a fragile and beautiful woman has such strength and fortitude. It's not even in every man." Vanessa gave him a warm smile. It had been a long time since anyone had said such words to her. Their romance had taken off. For the first time in a long time, she felt happy. And although she had been married for several years, it was only now that she realized that she really had a man to rely on. Soon James met Alex. Vanessa was worried about how the boy would react, but everything went very well. They shook hands, and when James gave the child a car, he was delighted. "It's a police car." Alex was practically out of breath. "I wanted one of those." Vanessa's heart was ready to melt from that picture. The only thing that clouded her life was that Matthew had suddenly decided not to give her a divorce. Linda had left him, after all, and he was left with nothing. In an instant, all his dreams of getting his father's business back fell like a house of cards. And having learnt that Vanessa began to meet with a rich man, Matthew resolutely refused to divorce her. She waited for him at the registry office for half an hour, but he didn't turn up. She called several times until she got a message that he had changed his mind about the divorce. A couple of days later, her mother-in-law contacted her. "Oh, Vanessa," she sighed theatrically, "Matthew is so hurt that you left. Come home, we miss you so much." "Mrs. Torrey, I'm not coming back. I want a divorce from your son," Vanessa replied irritably. "But how can you do that? You've been married for so many years." "Vanessa, you can't do that. You have to be able to forgive. Yes, Matthew had made a mistake, but he was a man. He's understandable." The mother-in-law was doing her best to defend her son. Vanessa couldn't listen to any more of this and just hung up the phone. With the help of the lawyers James hired for her, she was able to divorce Matthew through the court and was now free from her past. James also made sure that Matthew couldn't come near her again. He did everything he could to make Vanessa happy. One day he even brought Linda into the shop. Vanessa was in complete shock and stared at him incomprehensibly. "Hi, I came to apologize," Linda said through gritted teeth. "I was unfair to you at school and at work. I'm ashamed." It didn't take an astute person to realize that this apology was insincere, but Vanessa nodded. "And I'm sorry about your husband," Linda continued. "I didn't need him. I just wanted to hurt your feelings." "You can have him, he's free," Vanessa waved her hand. As Linda disappeared out the door, she heard a small snippet of her conversation with James. "Now will you give me the funding back?" Linda stepped in. I wouldn't think of it, James smiled broadly. What? Linda gasped in indignation. We had an agreement. When have you ever honored an agreement? He remarked caustically, alluding to all the broken commitments that had happened because of her. I want you to finally feel what it's always been like for the people you've let down and humiliated. Consider this your payback. And with those words, James asked that Linda be escorted out of his shop. He knew that her father had recently turned his back on her, stopped supporting her, leaving her with only one company that was rapidly approaching ruin. The only thing keeping it from collapse was James's investment, which had stopped as of today. So you did this for me, Vanessa asked, looking out of the office. She couldn't help but admit that the sight of a defeated classmate gave her satisfaction. I just wanted her to get the punishment she deserved, James replied, hugging her. But I won't let anyone else hurt you either, he whispered in her ear. A couple of months later, they were married. Vanessa and Alex moved into James' house. She didn't sell Caroline's flat, thinking that when Alex grew up, he would decide what to do with it. In the meantime, she could just rent it out and save the money for the baby's account. When she married James, Vanessa told him she was unlikely to have a baby. I've had 2 miscarriages, she confessed honestly. Vanessa, I love you and I want to share the rest of my life with you. So it doesn't matter to me whether we have children or not, James replied. Vanessa realized that he was deliberately saying those words to reassure her, and she was well aware that James wanted to have a child of his own after all. She could read it in his eyes when he spent time with Alex. And then one day, a real miracle happened. Vanessa, feeling some changes in her body, decided to take a pregnancy test, and it was positive. At that moment, her joyful screams echoed throughout the house. But she found the strength to hide the news until she talked to a doctor. Fortunately, the pregnancy was confirmed, and then she was in a hurry to tell her husband. James, I'm pregnant, Vanessa announced triumphantly, flying into his office. He immediately broke away from the papers he was scrutinizing, and in an instant was beside her. Is this for sure? Are you sure? He said in a slightly trembling voice. Yes, just from the doctor, Vanessa said. She had never seen James so happy. He hugged her in an impulse and swirled her around, asking her a lot of questions about her well-being. But Vanessa was quick to assure him that she and the baby were fine. Then I'm firing you, smiled at the father-to-be. What? Vanessa exclaimed, not understanding how he could say that. I've wanted to do that for a long time. My wife shouldn't have to go to all this trouble. And now that you have new worries, he looked at her tummy, I'm not going to let you go to work. You'll be on a much more responsible and important mission. Well, James, Vanessa tried to object weakly. I love my job, and the time limit allows me to go to it. I don't want to hear anything. Cut off the husband. The necessary order for dismissal had already been prepared, and she had no choice but to agree. James made sure she was surrounded by love and care. He decided that now they should go on holiday to some warm country. No need for his pregnant wife to endure the cold winter. Vanessa agreed with this idea, and they went on a trip. Alex was delighted because he had never flown on aeroplanes before. Over the past few months, they had become a real family, and Vanessa and James sometimes forgot that Alex wasn't their family at all. Soon he was calling them Mom and Dad, and Vanessa promised herself she would do everything she could to make sure the children grew up in love and care. She stroked her rounded tummy and looked at her husband, knowing that he shared her desire, and it made her feel very warm. Sammy set up the camera on the flight, and when he looked at the footage, he couldn't believe his eyes. Lexi could barely hold back her tears again. Once again, she believed for the umpteenth time that everything would still be okay. But Eleanor and her daughter Stacy, now they would once again make Lexi in front of her father look like a stupidly spoiled girl having a hard time going through adolescence. I knew Lexi was going through a rough patch. Eleanor rolled her eyes mockingly in front of her upset spouse. But what is it? Lexi's going downhill. If you only knew how hard it is for me to keep her in line. It wasn't like that with Stacy. I know you do a lot for Laurel, and I appreciate you for that, his father said with his eyes downcast. He was ashamed of his daughter for her supposedly ugly behavior. And after all, the most frustrating part was that it was useless to explain to him. Lexi had tried many times to convey to her family man that Eleanor was constantly vilifying her. When her father is not at home, her stepmother humiliates her, loads her with endless errands, does not let her study, meet with friends, do her favorite things. But Eleanor is a master at manipulating people and a wonderful actress. In addition, she always manages to turn the father against his daughter. She chooses such words that after them all Lexi's explanations and arguments seem to the man as pathetic excuses and attempts to slander a holy woman who pulls someone else's difficult child. So now Lexi won't even try to prove to her father that nothing is her fault. It wouldn't get her anywhere. The girl sat on her bed, huddled in the very corner, and tucked her face into a huge teddy bear. Her grandmother's neighbor, Daniel, had given it to her. Lexi was 7 years old at the time. How thrilled she was when she saw her neighbor with the big toy in his hands. He walked into their house, as always, with a big smile on his face. It was the most wonderful time. Would love to go back there. Remembering her grandmother, Lexi smiled. Yes, the girl longed endlessly for a family member who loved her and accepted her completely. Grandma had surrounded Lexi's only granddaughter with warmth and care, talked to her a lot, hugged her often, but she hadn't been there for Lexi for almost 5 years now. Virginia's grandmother died when the girl turned 10. And since then, Lexi's life has changed a lot and not for the better. But Lexi's childhood was just wonderful. Despite the fact that the girl did not know her own mom, she felt quite happy under her grandmother's wing. Lexi's mom died right after she gave birth to her daughter, her first and only long-awaited child. Some unforeseen complications from childbirth. There was nothing the doctors could do. That's how Sami, Lexi's father, found himself with an infant in his arms. He loved his wife very much and couldn't recover from losing her for a long time. What to do with a newborn baby, Sami had no idea. He was scared to even hold his daughter in his arms. It was good that his mother was there for him. She was the one who took over the girl at that difficult moment. To the great relief of a confused son, completely absorbed in his own grief. At first, the grandmother lived in the orphan family's city apartment. Lexi's mom hadn't had parents for a long time. They died when she was still a student. Sami worked as a ship's mechanic on a fishing boat and often went on voyages. And he wasn't too keen on taking care of a baby. So Lexi was left in her grandmother's care. At first, the grandmother tried to connect with her daughter Sami. She wanted him to take care of the baby on his own. Not that it was hard for Grandma. No, it was just, it's the right thing to do. But the man wouldn't hear of it. He was in grief, and he blamed his daughter for what happened to his beloved wife. Lexi realized it later, when she was older. For a long time, her father thought that it would be better if he and his wife lived without children, traveled, paid all the attention to each other, and were happy. Sami was very much in love with his young, beautiful wife and experienced her loss long and hard. Eventually, Grandma Virginia got tired of being the link between Sami and Lexi. She had long wanted to go to her small homeland in a cozy house under a green roof in the town of New Portland. And she had a lot of things to do there: a vegetable garden, chickens, cats, and a dog. During Grandma's prolonged absence, neighbor Daniel took care of the household. They certainly had a good and warm relationship. Grandma had helped him out more than once, but it was time to do the honors. Convinced that she couldn't get through to her adult son, Grandma packed up little Lexi and went home with her. Sami was only too glad for this turn of events. The infant clearly annoyed him and reminded him of the tragedy with its mere appearance. Besides, the man had to go on a long voyage soon, which also pleased him: waves, socializing with colleagues, hard physical labor. Sami hoped that all this would help him to distract himself from heavy thoughts. In part, by the way, it did. And the grandmother, with her usual energy, joined in caring for her little granddaughter: diapers, diapering, walks with a stroller. It was as if she felt like a young mother again, only now she enjoyed motherhood with full commitment. When her own son Sami was a baby, the woman did not realize what happiness it is as a child. She had to do a lot of things at once: rebuilding her life in a small village house, finishing her studies at the local college, and working part-time. Those were not easy times. Now the old woman gave all her time, all her attention, all her warmth to Lexi. Looking at the girl, she felt a mixture of pinched tenderness and acute pity. How could such a little girl be left without a mother? And the father didn't seem to want to take care of his daughter. Her son's behavior upset the caring grandmother, but she hoped that she could fix everything. Lexi grew up a sweet and trouble-free child with few illnesses. She did everything on time. She sat up, walked, and talked. Grandma couldn't get enough of her. Lexi grew up surrounded by friendly people, from whom only warmth and acceptance came. First, of course, was Grandma Virginia. She was the most important person to Lexi in general. Reliable, caring, kind, always understanding, always supportive. She opened the world to her granddaughter, talked to her a lot about everything in the world. She explained complicated things to the little girl. Lexi didn't remember that at least once her grandmother waved away her questions. As it usually happens with adults you won't understand yet, you'll learn when you grow up, go away. I don't have time for you now. That had never happened between Grandma and Lexi. It was like they understood each other without words. And Grandma also had friends and neighbors. And they too were involved in Lexi's upbringing. The girl went to visit them, made friends with their grandchildren. Sometimes a bunch of children would run from house to house. Somewhere they took turns eating breakfast together, somewhere they ate lunch, somewhere they watched TV together. Someone's father took the whole group to the river or to the woods. It was fun. The girl had a particularly warm relationship with Daniel. His house was across the street from her grandmother's. And the elderly man often came to the neighbor to help her with men's chores, to fix the faucet, fix the roof on the shed, move the closet, and the grandmother fed him tasty pies and treated him to fragrant cutlets. Daniel was a widower. Lexi, hearing that strange word for the first time, frowned thoughtfully, trying to figure out what it meant. Her grandmother explained, of course, there was no one to bake pies for the neighbor. Of course, the man was perfectly capable of cooking and didn't starve, but he never learned the art of baking. Lexi realized later that the neighbor must have had more than just friendly feelings for her grandmother. Why not? He's a widower. The neighbor's husband had been dead for a long time too. But the grandmother must have decided to devote her entire life to her granddaughter, with no other distractions. The older woman had big plans for Lexi's future. Grandma Virginia had been involved with Lexi a lot, put her whole soul into her, and thought she would be with her granddaughter for a long time, educate her, marry her off, help her with her great-grandchildren. It didn't work out. Lexi has the fondest memories of her childhood thanks to her grandmother. She especially loved summers, a truly carefree, fun time. Her granddaughters from the city, Karina and Marina, Lexi's best friends, would come to her neighbor Daniel's house for the vacations. She had been looking forward to them all year. The girls stayed together all day long, and the four of them never got bored. But still, they liked to spend time with other village kids, most of all riding bicycles, running to the river and the forest, playing hide and seek and catch up. In the evenings they told scary stories, played soccer barefoot, and crawled home tired but happy. Often the pack of kids slept over at Lexi's grandmother's house. She never said no to her granddaughter if the girl asked for a sleepover. There was plenty of room in the house. The kids chattered and giggled all night, but Grandma didn't reprimand them, realizing how fun and healthy it was. Lexi, of course, realized early on that she didn't live like the other kids. Others had moms, some even had dads. The moms were different, young and old, beautiful and not so beautiful, strict and kind. They were always there for their children. Lexi started asking her grandmother questions early on. She had to tell the girl what had happened. Carefully, gently, the woman told the story of her birth. Lexi didn't know her mom, so she wasn't too upset. Especially the grandmother said that Mommy was now in heaven and was helping her daughter from there. It was like a beautiful fairy tale. But every once in a while, a longing for something special and dear squeezed a child's heart. Lexi sometimes imagined what it would be like to live through this or that moment in life if Mom were there. However, thoughts of her mom didn't bother Lexi much while she lived with her grandmother Virginia in Novaya Petrovka. The girl was warm, cozy, and happy there. Her father, Henry, sometimes appeared at their house, always came to Lexi's birthday party with presents, if he was not on a voyage, and at least once every 2 months he visited his own. To Lexi, he was familiar and dear, but practically a stranger. A handsome young man with sad gray eyes, always trim, nicely dressed. He would show up with gifts, beautiful dolls, smart dresses, interesting books. Lexi wondered how he always managed to guess so accurately what she was dreaming of. Could he really read her mind? Later, the girl realized that it was her grandmother Virginia who told her son what to buy for her granddaughter in the city. Henry usually came for a couple of days, less often for a week or two. He didn't know what to talk to his daughter about. He asked the usual questions about school, friends, and hobbies. Lexi could see that he wasn't really interested, not like his neighbor, Daniel, who loved to hear stories about the adventures of country kids. He laughed, recalled episodes from his childhood, and unobtrusively gave important advice. The elderly neighbor was just a wonderful listener. Her father, on the other hand, only asked because he had to. Lexi understood this even as a child. The girl really wanted to please her father, to interest him in something, to please him. But all her attempts were defeated by his indifference. Henry diligently fulfilled his paternal duties, transferred money to her mother, bought necessary things for the house. When he came to visit, he did the garden and repairs. But he did it out of a sense of duty. Soul affection between him and his daughter never appeared. Grandmother Virginia tried to bring up her son, explained to him how to behave with the girl. The adults thought Lexi was asleep, but she heard everything. A girl needs her father's attention, the mother half explained to her son. She's growing up, maturing. Come visit more often, take her or fly together on vacation, Grandma Virginia said. Show her New York, Los Angeles, vacation by the sea. You know I work a lot, Mom Henry answered. I'm always on voyages, making money. By the way, I need to save up for Lexi's future. I often forget about the present. Grandma sighed sadly. Don't forget. No, I see how well you're doing. Lexi is happy with you. What can I give her? I'm still a little confused myself. Lexi, even though she was just a little girl, realized that she was burdening her father with her very existence. No, he won't take her on vacation or visit her more often. Her father was better off on his own, without her and her grandmother, in his incomprehensible, lonely life. That was a shame. Lexi loved her only parent very much, but realizing that your father didn't need you was scary and unpleasant. The girl even cried a little into her pillow, but in the morning she acted as if nothing had happened. And then the father left, hugging his daughter goodbye. I'm going on a long voyage, he warned. I won't see you for a long time. I won't be able to come to you on September 1st. Sorry. That's okay, the girl waved her hand nonchalantly. She was not accustomed that her father was absent in the most important moments of her life. So what? But her grandmother was always there for her. Lexi remembered the summer before first grade well because she had a birthday party in August where an important event took place. As always, Grandma set 2 tables in the garden, one for the children and one for the adults. She made her granddaughter's birthdays crowded, cheerful, colorful. The woman herself took great pleasure in socializing with good people. It was a celebration Lexi and her grandmother had been looking forward to all year. Daniel showed up a little later than the other guests and gave Lexi a huge teddy bear that his granddaughters Clara and Maggie had helped him pick out. Lexi marveled when she saw the teddy bear. She had never had such huge toys before. Happy birthday. Clara and Maggie rushed over to hug the birthday girl. Thank you. Lexi clapped her hands. What's Daniel still holding? I found a guitar in the attic the other day. I was sorting it out. I thought I'd throw it away, Daniel said. And I came across this instrument. Daniel, and I forgot that you are a musician, rejoiced Grandmother Virginia. Since when haven't you played? Probably since my wife died and I haven't picked up a guitar. Yes, about 15 years have passed, nodded the neighbor. In his eyes flashed sadness. I forgot about the guitar, and then suddenly I found it and remembered it. Play us something, asked one of the guests. Play. The children chimed in. Clara and Maggie stood proudly beside their grandfather. Sure enough, Daniel had suddenly become the star of the party. Everybody's looking at him and asking for him. Well, what do you want to play? A ditty or something? The man asked. Everyone murmured approvingly. Then Daniel grabbed the guitar, struck the strings with his fingers, and the magic began. Melodic sounds filled the garden. Lexi stared at her neighbor with her mouth open and wondered, how does he do it? Where does this beautiful melody come from? The guests fell silent, looking at Daniel. Well, what are you singing? Come on. Who's first? Who's the bravest? The mother of a neighbor boy, one of Lexi's friends, started a ditty in a thick bass. She sang something about a millionaire who's like a calf. The adults laughed, but Lexi didn't get the point of the ditty. She listened to the melody. The guests were getting into the swing of things. They ordered more and more songs for Daniel, and he, strangely enough, knew them all. Well, if he didn't know them, he was quick to pick out the right tunes. The adults sang in unison. It was so wonderful, so funny, so beautiful. The children came out from behind the table and started a game of hide and seek. Of course, they called Lexi to come with them, but she couldn't tear herself away. She kept sitting next to Daniel, listening, and then suddenly she started singing along with the adults. She quickly learned the words of the song about the wounded soldier. It was probably the third time the guests sang it. Ashley's mom was the first to notice. "Listen, can you hear her singing?" The guests fell silent. Lexi did too. She was embarrassed to sing. One woman, Ashley's mom, realized this and belted out the song with her. It was easier for Lexi that way. When the chords died down, there was a round of applause. "Good job. You sing well," the adults praised Lexi. "Not just good," Grandma Virginia shook her head. "The girl has talent. As an employee of our cultural center, I say, Virginia, why did you hide such a treasure from us for so many years?" "I didn't know it myself," smiled the proud grandmother. Since then, Daniel had become an even more frequent guest in the house of his grandmother and granddaughter. Lexi herself was always running to him. The man taught the girl a lot of children's funny songs. Now she constantly hummed them everywhere at home, in the vegetable garden, even on the way to the store. Why didn't Lexi realize before how great it was to sing? She didn't go to daycare because it was too far to drive her. Grandma didn't work anyway, so her granddaughter grew up with her. At daycare, of course, a music teacher would have noticed Lexi's talent sooner. At home, they had almost no music. Grandma usually had audiobooks on, not songs. So it wasn't until Lexi was 7 years old that she realized she incredibly enjoyed singing and music. "School will start. We'll send you to the cultural center," her grandmother and mother said. "She says they have a good choir there. They even invite them to other cities for performances. Will you sing there? You can't bury such talent in the ground." Lexi listened to her grandmother and looked forward to September. Lexi wanted to be on stage with people who shared her passion. The future seemed bright and fabulous. And the girl also asked Daniel to teach her to play the guitar. He refused at first. "It's too early for you. Your fingers are small, your hands are weak. You can't hold such a big thing." But the neighbor was wrong. Lexi was able to play the right chords the first time. "See, Grandpa, she can do it." "Are you going to teach her?" Clara and Ashley asked. "Of course I will." Daniel scratched the back of his head in puzzlement. "What are you going to do now?" The neighbor kept his promise. Every day he taught little Lexi chords and everything he knew. The student was making great progress. Not only was she picking up everything on the fly, she was also learning how to pick out melodies. "Of course, I don't know much about it." Daniel shared his observations with his grandmother Virginia, but she seems to have an exceptional ear. She should go to music school. "I wish she could," sighed Grandma, "but we don't have it in Petrovka. There's only a choir here." "Do you go to town often?" "Every day." "At least she'll be in the choir," Anna promised. Although her granddaughter is still young, older kids sing there. And then came the long-awaited September 1st. Lexi still remembered how her grandmother proudly led her through the village streets by the hand to the school ceremony. The girl was a little nervous, but it was a joyful excitement. She and her grandmother carefully prepared for the festive day. The day before they went to the city, where they chose the most beautiful things for a long time: lacquered shoes, a smart white blouse, a lush dark skirt. In the morning, Grandma braided Lexi's hair into tight braids, which she decorated with big white bows. She slipped a beautiful bouquet of gladioli into her granddaughter's hands. Lexi still remembered their delicious scent. Passers-by smiled. Grandmothers with dressed-up granddaughters congratulated both of them on the beginning of their school journey, wishing the girl only A's. Lexi thanked people. She knew there would be a celebration tonight. Her grandmother had already invited the neighborhood kids to visit and made the dough for her signature pies from the evening. Lexi waited for classes to start at the House of Culture. She was so excited to sing on stage. "Lexi, the teacher will really like you," her mom assured her. And so she did. Peter appreciated the new student's abilities. However, he didn't let her down, despite her age. If the girl did not hit the notes or confused words, strictly reprimanded. But those were minor things. The main thing was that Lexi felt in her element. Grandmother Virginia worried that modest granddaughter is lost in front of the audience. But no, the little singer behaved on stage like a fish in water. First Lexi was in the choir, and then began to perform solo. That kind of gift is rare. A real unlimited diamond. She should be in good hands. What do we have? It's just a country club, Peter told his grandmother when she came to pick up her granddaughter. Lexi didn't give up her guitar lessons either. It had become a daily necessity for her. The girl had long ago surpassed her neighbor teacher, Daniel, but she still went to see him every day. First of all, he had a guitar. Second, the neighbor could always give valuable advice about playing. Third, no one Lexi knew more about music than Daniel. He praised on a case-by-case basis, noticing subtleties. He sincerely admired his little neighbor's success. Later, living with her father, Lexi learned the expression soulmate. She and Daniel were probably just that, soulmates. The neighbor replaced the grandfather Lexi had never known, and maybe even, at some points, the father. As time went on, Lexi grew up. She did well in school, performed with the choir, and continued to learn to play the guitar. On her next birthday, her father gave his daughter an instrument of her own. Of course, the idea of the gift was suggested to him by her grandmother. The girl had everything she needed for happiness: a caring grandmother, near understanding, kind neighbors, faithful friends. Lexi felt loved and native. In all of her ranges, she was her own and did not even think about moving to her father in the city someday. What would there be to do there? Gray concrete boxes instead of houses, crowds of people rushing somewhere who don't even look at each other. And my father was dear to me, but completely unfamiliar and distant. People around her often said that there were more prospects in the city, that it would be much more interesting for the girl to grow up there. But Lexi felt quite happy and satisfied with her life. Her childhood had been warm, sunny, and cozy. Until that fateful day in February when, for some reason, Daniel had come to school to pick her up. Lexi had been going to school and coming home alone for a long time. Her grandmother, Kira, had accompanied her at first, but since second grade, Lexi had become quite independent. It was not a long way, but the time flew by in the company of her friends and neighbors. The girls were walking and talking about everything, laughing, discussing the details of the school day, making plans. And then suddenly there was a knock at the door during a literature lesson. A quiet conversation between the teacher and someone who had not crossed the threshold. And then Mrs. Ellen's worried eyes and her quiet request. "Lexi, get ready, your neighbor is here to pick you up." Lexi felt the stares of everyone in the class fixed on her. That was how unusual this was. When Lexi saw Daniel, she immediately knew something terrible had happened. The dull look in her eyes, the gray color of his face. The always calm man's hands trembled slightly. Grandma Lexi immediately guessed. An icy hand squeezed her heart. Anxiety. In that instant, the girl realized that Grandma was the whole world to her. The man nodded silently. "What's wrong with her?" "She's not well." "They took her to the hospital," he said. Daniel told the girl only at home that her grandmother was gone. The woman suddenly felt sick. Her heart was racing. She sat down on a bench. She thought she'd waited out at home. That's how she was caught by a neighbor who came to borrow some eggs. They immediately called an ambulance, but the doctors who arrived could only pronounce her dead. So Lexi was left alone in the world. That night she was taken in by her neighbor Kira. She and her grandmother were close friends. In the company of a kind-hearted woman and her grandchildren, Lexi was not so dreary, as if she was alone at home. But the girl was still in some incomprehensible state. Everything that was happening seemed unreal to her. This simply could not happen. How there is no grandmother. And what? She will never be again. Never at all. Dad was on a trip. He was informed, of course, but it took time to get to the mainland. The man didn't even make it to the funeral organized by his neighbors. During those terrible days, Lexi somehow didn't think about her future. She cried a lot, often talking to the neighbors about her grandmother. They knew and loved her and said nice things about her. This made the girl feel a little better. And then her father arrived, awkwardly hugged his daughter, and said the words that made Lexi cringe in pain once again. Well, daughter, we'll live together in the city now. How in the city? Why the city? Lexi didn't want to leave Oliver Ranges at all. Grandma's gone, of course, and she never will be. But here is school, here are friends, here are neighbors, here is choir, after all, here is Daniel, who will always support and comfort. Here's Kira, Stacy and her mom Laurel. What's out there? A cold, alien father who knows nothing at all about me. Yeah, he's a stranger to me, for that matter. I'm not going with you, Lexi said firmly, pulling away from her parent. I'm not going to the city. The man looked at his daughter and flapped his eyes confusedly. He didn't know what to say to her in response. The neighbors came to the rescue. Very carefully and gently, they conveyed to Lexi the idea that there was no other way out. The neighbors hugged the girl, saying that they too would miss her very much. There were tears in the eyes of these people, women and men, grandmothers and grandfathers. They all gave Lexi their phone numbers and assured her that they would always welcome her calls. Lexi was crying too. It was hard for her to part with Oliver Ranges, but the sensitive adults managed to convince the girl that she had to do it, otherwise there was no other way. You come to visit, Daniel said, for the vacations with a small basket. Will you live with me? What do I care if you have 2 girls or 3? You guys have more fun. Lexi knew it wasn't a polite invitation. Daniel was really looking forward to her vacation, and that made her feel at least a little warmer and brighter. So Lexi went into town. It wasn't the first time the girl had found herself in her father's apartment. She and her grandmother Kira sometimes came to visit him. Lexi even had her own room here, a bed, a large separate closet, a desk, everything a child needed. Truth be told, the girl never liked this place. Much more, she loved her bedroom at her grandmother's house. There were a lot of cozy and important things: plush toys, interesting books, an aquarium with colorful fish. But there was no way out. She had to get settled in a new place. The first thing Lexi did was to put on the bed the same teddy bear that Daniel had given her the summer before first grade. It made her feel cozy. The toy reminded her of those happy and carefree times when her grandmother was around. Lexi's life had completely turned around. There was a lot to get used to: a new room, a new school, new faces, unfamiliar surroundings, other rules. A father constantly immersed in his own thoughts. He'd moved to a new position that didn't involve months of traveling. He had to be with his daughter all the time, and he was indeed there all the time, but only physically. Justin's thoughts were clearly far away. Lexi could see that her father missed the sea, his colleagues, his friends, his old job. And he often complained to acquaintances about the fact that now he gets much less money. I'm not used to living like this, counting pennies to paychecks, Justin told one of his former colleagues over the phone. Here, on the big land, you can't earn as much as at sea. Justin tried very hard to be a good father. In the mornings, he made his daughter breakfast. In the evening, he made sure to ask Lexi how her day was going. In the evening, he never forgot to check in with Lexi about her day. Lexi could see that he wasn't interested in what she thought of her teacher or what her classmates had said to her. Justin bought the girl everything she needed: clothes, groceries, school supplies, toys. He even enrolled her in music school. You used to play guitar a lot at Oliver Ranges. Why don't you pick it up anymore? Lexi sighed. Yes, indeed. Since Grandma Kira had passed away, she hadn't played anything once, simply because she wasn't in the mood. There was so much on her mind. There was some kind of constant chaos in her mind and soul. By the end of the day, the girl was so tired of her own thoughts, impressions, and emotions that she fell asleep like a hamstring. Did she care about the guitar? But her father's words made Lexi remember about her favorite instrument. The girl took the guitar, ran her fingers over the strings, and she immediately felt better. It was like a warmth from the past. And why had she never guessed that music would soothe her? Do you want to go to music school? Dad suggested it. Lexi thought about it and agreed. From an early age, she had heard from those around her that that was where she should go. That in their small village, such a talent could not be fully revealed. That Lexi needed competent teachers from the city. And here it is, the opportunity everyone's been talking about. It took a lot of effort for the father to get his daughter enrolled. First of all, the school year was coming to an end. Secondly, the school teachers were not satisfied with the age of the student. The girl was 10, and the music school accepted 6 or 7-year-olds. But Justin managed to insist on his own. And so, just a couple days after their conversation, Lexi started attending the new school. The school was large, bright, and not at all like Oliver Range's, whose interiors hadn't changed since the Soviet Union. Everything was different here. At first, Lexi was even afraid of the new teachers. They looked too strict and aloof. But when the study began, the girl realized that she got exactly where she needed to go. So much new knowledge, so many subtleties. Lexi absorbed musical literacy like a sponge and, of course, made great progress. Very soon, teachers began to praise the diligent, talented student. It was very pleasant. The girl gradually settled in the city. She had new friends and girlfriends. True, such warm and almost kinship relations, as in Oliver Range's, with the guys with no one has not formed. But it wasn't customary to have such close friendships here, and what they did have was great. Lexi and her classmates went to movies and skating rinks, to pizza parlors and entertainment centers. Sometimes they would just walk around the park. Sometimes they would go to someone's house. The birthdays of local children were not like in the village. They were not hearty gatherings of children and adults, but trips to a bowling alley or a trampoline center. Children were entertained by special people dressed in the costumes of cartoon characters, animators. Interesting, of course, even fun in some places. But every time Lexi remembered her own heartfelt birthdays, full of sincere hugs. They were organized for her granddaughter by her loving grandmother, Kira. How Lexi missed and longed for her. It was not the first great loss in her life, but the girl didn't know her mom, wasn't used to her, and therefore wasn't too worried about her absence. Grandmother was a different matter. With her father, Justin, relations were polite, even, but some strained, clumsy even. He tried to be involved as a parent, but it didn't work. He wasn't interested in his daughter's thoughts and experiences. He didn't understand her at all. Lexi didn't feel even a fraction of the love and warmth that Grandma Kira gave her, and it was very hard. The girl was literally freezing. It was good that she had music in her life. Lexi saved herself by picking up a guitar and dissolving into melodic sounds. She would play whatever the teachers assigned. She also picked up songs she liked or composed something of her own. With the help of sounds, the girl used to express her emotions, her longing for her grandmother and her former life, her anxiety, her desire to be closer to her father, her only relative now. Music relaxed, soothed, helped her feel more confident. As time passed, the small family's life was gradually getting better. Justin was surprised to discover that his daughter could cook. It was unexpected. The children of his acquaintances of that age could not hold a knife and were considered almost babies. Lexi, on the other hand, was adept with all kitchen tools, and at her young age baked mind-boggling pies and made flavorful borscht. When the girl first made her and her father a delicious dinner from the leftovers found in the refrigerator, the man was stunned. Returning from work, he even at the entrance to the entrance caught the aroma, from which he began to salivate profusely. But Justin couldn't imagine that those odors were coming from his apartment. "What are you, all of you?" He marveled as he entered the apartment. "Or did someone come to see us?" "It's me," Lexi smiled. She liked the look of amazement on her parents' face. "My grandmother taught me." Grandma Kira had indeed taught her granddaughter the art of cooking from a young age. As a little girl, Lexi had helped her knead dough, and when she got a little older, the girl learned to wield a knife like a skilled hostess. She even liked cooking. It was almost like music, a real art. Now, Lexi often cooked for their little family, and she did it with great pleasure. She loved to see how eagerly her father devoured her culinary masterpieces. Somehow, the relationship between the daughter and her father gradually improved. Yes, the adaptation was not easy and very long. Both had to work hard, but in the end, Lexi got what she wanted, the warmth and care of her favorite native man. It didn't happen all at once, not all of a sudden. She won back her father's heart little by little. A crust of ice was binding it. At first it gave cracks, and then it slowly fell away, crumbled away. One day Justin found it interesting to talk to his daughter. She had become all grown up, sensible and life-rich, full of events and impressions. The father now looked at his daughter in a completely different way. Lexi could feel it, and was glad for the change. Her father was no longer withdrawn when he came home from work. No, Justin now shared both his future plans and news from work with his daughter. Father and daughter went on several vacations, as Grandma Kira had once requested. Justin showed Lexi the big cities of Russia: St. Petersburg, Moscow, Samara, Kazan. The girl marveled and marveled, looking around, and Justin genuinely enjoyed her reaction. They were such wonderful trips. Lexi found out that her father was a very intelligent and erudite man. He was knowledgeable in a wide variety of fields: architecture, history, archaeology, culture. And he enjoyed sharing that knowledge with his daughter. The first summer after Kira's grandmother passed away, Lexi and her father came to Novopetrovka. The man prepared the house for the long absence of the owners, closed the windows with shutters, wrapped the furniture with polyethylene, threw out junk from the attic and from the basement. And Justin also found a real treasure: puffy albums with photos that his grandmother had so carefully kept. Here was the entire family history, from Grandma and Grandpa's ancestors to Lexi. This archive was what my father took home to the city apartment. Getting the house ready only took a couple days. During that time, Lexi felt as if she had traveled back in time. Familiar places, smiling neighbors, old friends who missed her so much. When her father told the girl it was time to go back, Lexi even had tears in her eyes. "What do you mean, go back? We've only been here for a little while," she said. "But I have to go to work, and I'm done." "Why do we have to stay?" asked the father, who had not yet gotten to know his daughter well enough. He could not understand the girl's worries. But Daniel, of course, had guessed it all at once. "Let her stay with me for a couple weeks," the older man said to Justin. "My granddaughters are here. The three of them have been friends since birth. They'll miss each other. Let them go to the river, run in the woods, breathe fresh air. They'll be happy. Everything is better than girls all day long in a stuffy apartment, while you're at work." "It's weird," Justin said uncertainly. "You, Uncle Dan, are like nobody to her." "What do you mean, nobody?" The old man was indignant. "She's like a third granddaughter to me. I've known her ever since." Lexi's heart was warmed by the elderly neighbor's words. She looked at her father pleadingly. To spend at least a few weeks in her beloved Novopetrovka in the company of her best friends was happiness. Her father agreed, and Lexi was jumping for joy, and Clara and Maggie jumped with her. It was a wonderful time. Everything was the same as always: late-night games with friends, familiar places, neighbors who have known you since you were born. Except that Kira's grandmother wasn't around, and her house looked out onto the road with boarded-up shutters. Sadness periodically clutched the girl's heart. The people around her sensitively picked up on these mood swings and tried to support her. They made it easier for the girl. And then the father came to pick up his daughter, and it was over. Lexi cried as she left for the city. Her friends and girlfriends hugged her. Daniel stroked the girl's head. It's okay. Don't be so upset. You're not leaving forever. When you have your fall vacation, your father will bring you here to rest. You are welcome here." Lexi understood that the elderly neighbor says it not for the sake of a red word. She was always welcome in Novopetrovka. Realizing this simple truth made her feel better and warmer. But Lexi never came to Novopetrovka for vacation again. Shortly after she left, Daniel hospitalized with a stroke. He recovered, but he could no longer live alone in the village. Daniel was taken in by his daughter, Clara, and Maggie's mother. The family lived in another town, so Lexi never saw her childhood friends or her kind neighbor again. Another stroke of fate. Be that as it may, the girl did get used to the new reality. Relations with her father became more cordial and warm. The household had settled down, life wasn't bad. At least there was always a native person near Lexi, ready to support and listen. And the girl appreciated it. But her father kept talking about going back to sea. "You know, it's my thing. Waves, wind, sea air, and space. Nothing for miles around. It's breathtaking," he said. Lexi understood. She knew exactly what it was like to get her heart racing at the sight of her favorite scenery. "And we don't have enough money," Sami lamented. "Those who go on voyages get paid a lot more. It's a different kind of pay here on land." Lexi didn't think they were in need. They had all the basic necessities, even more. They dressed well, ate well, traveled. but her father still dreamed of more and often remembered his former earnings. "Well, I'm an adult," Lexi once said reasonably. "I'm 13. I've been going to school by myself for a long time. I've been cooking since I was a kid. Why don't you come back? I can see how much you miss the sea." "I'll be fine on my own." "No, you're just a child. You can't be left alone for so long." "I don't know what will happen," answered my father. What could happen? Sincerely perplexed the girl. She felt independent enough to live a month or two alone. Yes, it will be boring without Daddy, of course, but she will manage. "According to the law, you can't be left alone. You're only 13, said the father. "The neighbors will find out. They'll call the guardianship office." Yes, the neighbors here are strange, not like in Novopetrovka. I agree, Lexi nodded. "How do you feel about having a house helper?" Au pair. What am I, Stacy?" the girl said indignantly. "Well, if I go on a voyage, you need someone to look after you. It won't be a babysitter, but more like a housekeeper. You're au pair." "I don't need an au pair," Lexi mumbled. But she already knew her father wouldn't back down. "That's not the way it works." "Fine, hire your own housekeeper," she said. Father decided to return to the sea, immediately perked up. Now he smiled and joked a lot. Sami looked like a perfectly happy man. Lexi was happy looking at her parent. But she was also a little worried. What if she didn't get along with this woman who was supposed to be looking after her in the house? What if it turns out to be some nasty aunt? The search for a housekeeper was not going well. Father contacted many agencies and himself on the ads called, but came across only babysitters for children, retired women, or students, ready to spend a few hours a day with a small child for a fee. But no one agreed to live with a teenager and look after the apartment. However, I have not given up hope of finding such a person, he optimistically declared to his daughter after another failure. One day, Sammy returned from a friend's birthday party in high spirits. It was late in the evening. Lexi was sitting over a difficult math homework assignment. "It's all taken care of," her father happily told her. "I found you a housekeeper. A housekeeper. It's the best thing that could happen to you." Lexi was a little tense. After all, this was about her destiny. "Could you be more specific?" asked the girl. And the father told his daughter the story of this fateful, as it would later turn out, meeting. Here is the edited text with the replacement of names. Sammy came to his buddy Jake's birthday party. They had once graduated from university together, then even worked on the same ship. Later, the old friends' paths had diverged, but there was still a warm buddy relationship between them. It was Jake's anniversary. On this occasion, the man decided to roll a big celebration in a restaurant. Among the guests were many people Sami had seen for the first time, including Grace, an acquaintance of Jake's wife. The tall, slender woman looked beautiful, stylishly and tastefully dressed, smiling, friendly. At some point, Grace and Sami got to talking. Both had already had a few drinks and were relaxed. The evening moved into the revelation phase. It was time for some fascinating and candid life stories. It turned out that Grace had recently divorced her husband. Or rather, according to the woman, her husband simply put her and her daughter Emma on the street because of a silly quarrel. How could that man do that to his child? Sami was outraged. "I have Emma," not his daughter Grace sighed. "This is my child from my first marriage. My spouse, now ex, never could accept another man's daughter. He never loved her." Grace found herself in a desperate situation. The money for renting a house was woefully inadequate. The woman could not find a good job as she had no education and experience. She devoted herself to her husband and daughter. She looked after the house, cooked delicious meals, organized everyday life. And he, a successful businessman, provided the family with money. Grace felt happy, protected, but without realizing it, was in a very vulnerable position, completely financially dependent on her husband. "And now I'm all alone in this predicament, grasping for any part-time job to feed myself," and Emma, Grace complained. "My parents are long gone. I have nowhere to wait for help. A friend invited me to a party, said I needed some distraction. And I'm still thinking about my own problems all the time." "Yeah, I thought I was in a hopeless situation," Sami stretched out. "You're certainly having a much harder time," Sami said sympathetically. I hope things work out for you in the end. I, for one, will try to help you with your job. We're kind of looking for a secretary at our company." Grace missed the potential job offer, but caught on to the words desperate situation. And Sami told this sensitive, beautiful woman about everything about the death of his beloved wife during childbirth, about his daughter Lexi, about the mother who raised the girl until she was 10 years old, about the difficulties of adapting to his own child when suddenly Lexi was left without the care of a loving grandmother. But alas, he has to go to sea all the time because of work. And for his daughter needs a nanny or a au pair, however, no one agrees. People offer hourly babysitting services for babies, but no one wants to live with a teenager and keep an eye on the house, Sami complained. Grace's eyes lit up at this admission from the man. "Really, don't you realize that our meeting today was no accident?" the woman exclaimed. "It is a miracle of some kind. Providence has brought us together." Much later, it turns out that it was not Providence that brought Sami and Grace together. Jake's wife was aware of her husband's friend's situation and she wanted to help her friend in distress. The women had purposely arranged for Grace and Sami to meet at the party, thinking it was a wonderful outlet for both the woman and the single man. "How old is your child?" Grace clarified. 13. "And your daughter Emma is 15, if I heard correctly." "Yes, Emma is 15. I know how to raise teenage girls. I know how to approach them. I love to talk to them. We'll definitely make a relationship work." Sami thought about it. He needed a housekeeper. That was true. But he was counting on a professional employee of a specialized agency. And here was Grace. And with a teenage daughter. But on the other hand, he was pressed for time. He had to leave soon, and the problem wasn't solved yet. "Your little girl is about to go through puberty. It's a very dangerous period," Grace warned. "I know, Emma's already been through it. At that age, children need special supervision, or they'll be in trouble." Eleanor sounded convincing, and she looked confident. Sami thought about it. Indeed, this woman had a lot of experience with children. Her daughter Stacy was a little older than Lexi, after all. The girls would have a lot of fun together. They'd definitely find a common language. Plus, Eleanor was a real beauty. Sami liked her company. She had a great disposition. After some thought, the man agreed. "I think it's a great option." He smiled at Eleanor, whom he liked more and more. A strong woman, unbroken by the blows of fate. She radiated goodwill. Pleasant, intelligent, sensitive. Yes, exactly the kind of person Sami would want Lexi to be around. Eleanor and her daughter Stacy moved into Sami and Lexi's apartment. The man put them in the living room. There was plenty of room. Both Eleanor and Stacy seemed like nice and kind individuals to Lexi at first. "Wow, your hair is so cool." Stacy marveled when she saw the girl. "Can I try to braid it for you?" Lexi shrugged. She was never much into hair, just a neat ponytail before school. That was it. But Stacy had put a stylish braid hairstyle on Lexi's head, which suited her incredibly well. Lexi admired her reflection in the mirror. "You look beautiful," Stacy smiled. "You're pretty too, Lexi." And it was the plain truth. Both Stacy and her mother were real beauties. Tall, slender, with big eyes that always attracted attention. They were the kind of women men would always look at. And both Stacy and Eleanor knew how to emphasize the advantages of their appearance. They chose successful outfits, skillfully applied makeup, made beautiful, stylish hairstyles. Lexi had seen it as magic at first. In her and her father's house, there were never any cosmetics or closets full of clothes. The girl watched Eleanor's movements, mesmerized as she applied her makeup in front of the mirror. "Interesting?" The woman smiled, noticing the girl's curious look. "Sit next to me. I'll show you how it's done." And in half an hour, Eleanor made Lexi a completely different person. In the mirror, the girl saw not herself, but a beautiful girl, like a heroine from a fairy tale, with a delicate blush on her cheeks and plump, dull lips. Splendid. Eleanor marveled. Always walk like that. But Lexi couldn't look like this all the time. Yes, it was beautiful, but she didn't like the feeling of makeup on her face. And it was a waste of time first to apply makeup, then to wash it off. It could take an hour to do it all. Eleanor and Stacy gave Lexi what she lacked: so much female attention. They went shopping together, picked out outfits, talked about movies and celebrities. Before school, Lexi now always dressed Stacy up doing her wonderful, stylish and comfortable hairstyles. Eleanor and Stacy also helped the girl with her closet. "Your clothes are kind of, gray." "They're gray," Eleanor said, inspecting Lexi's closet. "They don't let you wear anything else at school," the girl said. She hadn't thought about it before. It was silly. You could always find something that would fit the regulations and fit nicely. "Stacy, I think we should go shopping. Are you coming? You have amazing taste. We're going to need your advice." Of course I'm in. I love shopping. Eleanor and Stacy had indeed picked out clothes that made Lexi look like a princess: tight lace blouses, slightly shorter skirts, heeled shoes. "Well, that's different," Eleanor was pleased, looking at her mentee. "You have a wonderful figure. You are slender, long-legged. Why hide it all under shapeless hoodies?" Lexi had never gotten so many compliments at school before. For the first time in her life, she felt not just smart, but truly beautiful. And it was wonderful. Stacy had become Lexi's true older friend, almost the sister she had always dreamed of having. Being older, Stacy would tell Lexi about her relationships with boyfriends and girlfriends. It was so exciting that the girl even forgot to breathe, as if she were watching a TV show. Stacy was a great storyteller. Her speech flowed smoothly and measuredly, and Lexi's eyes were filled with vivid pictures of this beautiful girl's life. Lexi admired Stacy. "Secrets again?" Eleanor peeked into their room. "Going to watch movies already? Did you get the pizza?" Those were wonderful days. Lexi felt like she was part of a sophisticated woman's world. Her father loved her, but he couldn't give her all that girly companionship. It turned out Lexi really needed it, though she hadn't realized it before. When Eleanor learned that Lexi could cook well, she was thrilled. Wow. The women marveled when they saw the girl taking a tray of pies out of the oven. "Did you make these yourself?" "Yes," Lexi answered, not without pride. "My grandmother taught me. I've been doing this for a long time." Lexi was tired of ordering food from restaurants, so she decided to treat Eleanor and Stacy to homemade pies. "This is divine," Stacy praised, taking a big bite of pie. "I've never tasted anything like it, but it's bad for your figure, of course. At your age, is that okay?" "You won't believe it, and I still haven't learned how to bake," Eleanor smiled. "And you, Lexi, surprise me. You're so young, and you're already so good." Lexi blossomed from these compliments. Now, to please Eleanor and Stacy, the girl tried to cook something every day. She was actually much better at it than Eleanor. Her soups were often too runny and salty, and her casseroles were burnt on top but still raw inside. So Eleanor preferred to order takeout. Lexi had no trouble making dinner or lunch for three, and she was happy to do it. After all, Stacy and Eleanor had taken such good care of her, taught her so much. And then her father came back. Eleanor and Stacy moved back into their rented apartment, and Lexi was very upset about it. She missed their heart-to-heart talks, going to coffee shops and shopping. Lexi missed Eleanor and Stacy, who had opened up a whole other side of life for her that she hadn't even known existed before. When her father returned, he asked his daughter how she had been during his absence. Lexi described Eleanor and Stacy in the most vivid colors. "They're so great. You can't imagine. They're so interesting, so good," she shared with her father. He only smiled, seeing that he was satisfied with his daughter's stories. A month later, Michael was sent on another trip, this time for a longer period of time. Once again, Eleanor and her daughter came to look after Lexi. The time flew by. When her father returned, they didn't leave, but stayed in the apartment, which Lexi was incredibly happy about. The girl noticed, of course, that her father looked at Eleanor in a special way. And the woman herself, though she tried to hide it, clearly sympathized with her employer. But Lexi thought she was just imagining what she wanted. Turns out she wasn't. It was a long time coming. "I had no doubt it would happen," Stacy said as Lexi shared her impressions with her. "I just got the timing a little wrong. But okay, I'm so careful, so experienced. I've got a good eye." After the next flight, Michael and Eleanor got married. They didn't have a big wedding, just 4 of them at a restaurant. Lexi was over the moon. This beautiful, kind woman had joined their family. She would now live with them, giving Lexi the feminine attention she so desperately needed. That's great. The girl had dreamed of something like this for a long time, but everything turned out much better than she could have imagined. Not only did she have Eleanor, but also Stacy, practically an older sister, a friend who knew so many interesting things. Everything had changed as soon as Michael left on his voyage. The stamp in the passport radically transformed Eleanor's attitude to her stepdaughter. Lexi expected from her stepmother and stepsister the same behavior, care, heartfelt conversations, joint walks. But all of that had abruptly stopped. Eleanor went to her friends and beauty parlors. Stacy, too, was living her own life, friends, admirers, nightclubs. And Lexi? She was all alone. Alone again. She'd been abruptly ignored. The only thing she was praised for was cooking and cleaning. Lexi single-handedly cleaned the entire apartment and cooked mind-blowing lunches and dinners just to earn Eleanor's approval. She didn't realize what was going on. Her stepmother praised the girl discreetly and ordered new dishes the next day. Sometimes Eleanor also asked Lexi to mop the floors. That was all the communication. Lexi felt confused and deceived Stacy. "Tell me, how did you guys hang out at the club?" One day the girl asked her stepsister a question. She looked at Lexi absent-mindedly and said nothing. When the girl repeated the question, Stacy sighed heavily. "How clingy are you? You're so clingy. You're impossible to be around." It was a blow to Lexi. She thought she and Stacy were friends. The girl used to share the details of her life with her. They talked a lot, went for walks together. Stacy had given Lexi invaluable advice on makeup and matching clothes. And now this. More to come. Eleanor had gotten the hang of it. Lexi was now in charge of the entire household. Stepmother, in the absence of her husband, practically did not cook. It became the stepdaughter's duty, as well as cleaning. If earlier the girl was at least praised for helping around the house, now she received only remarks and reproaches if she did not have time to do something. And it was not easy. Lexi had studies in music school. Of course, the girl's grades got worse. It is impossible to do everything at home and study well at the same time. "I'm tired. I don't have time to study," Lexi tried to explain to Eleanor. "This is the second time I've skipped music." "At least let Stacy cook and clean once in a while," Lexi said. "That, my dear, is called laziness." Eleanor looked at her stepdaughter indifferently. "Nothing supernatural is required of you. Didn't you know that people who live together share household chores equally?" Equal was too far from the truth. There was no such thing as equal sharing. Stacy lived her life to the fullest, going out with friends, going on dates, shopping, and going to beauty salons. Sometimes the underage Stacy didn't even spend the night at home. Eleanor called her every now and then, and sometimes even drove out at night to pick up her wayward daughter. Only her father, Sammy, knew nothing about this side of Stacy's life. In front of him, the girl behaved impeccably. Stacy did absolutely nothing around the house. Even Lexi had to make her bed. "Stacy is studying for her final exams," Eleanor said in response to Lexi's fair comment. At first, the girl still tried to object. "But you have 2 years to go to college, and she's about to." However, Lexi had never seen Stacy with a textbook. She was reluctant to go to school because she had a lot of problems with her studies. She was only interested in dating and partying, and she was only concerned with her own appearance. Stacy did not get out of beauty salons, which of course gave its fruits. The girl looked great, well-groomed, spectacular, stylish. Eleanor spent the lion's share of the money that Sami left for the household on herself and her daughter. Lexi got the leftovers. Eleanor worked in the kitchen and around the house only when Sami was home, creating the image of the perfect housewife. She didn't work herself, explaining to her husband that the girls needed special supervision now, because it was a difficult age. "Keep an eye on the teenagers," Eleanor assured him. At that time, Sami agreed with her arguments. She had a knack for convincing others of the reasonableness and profitability of her decisions. It was her talent. Sami even sincerely believed that he himself proposed to his wife to deal with the house and children, and appreciated this, as it seemed to him, Eleanor's self-sacrifice. Leaving a career for the sake of family happiness and well-being, it is almost a feat. Eleanor had a great influence on his father. He looked at her with admiring eyes, believed every word she said, thought she was perfect and infallible. Lexi used to love it. She was happy for a loved one who had been lonely for so many years. and now, finally, he had found his love. But now the girl was hurt and even scared. Eleanor gradually turned from a kind, sensitive woman into a monster. The stepmother was making higher and higher demands on Lexi. Every day the girl was bombarded with reproaches. And she cooks wrong, and cleans too slowly, and pays a lot of attention to nonsense. What do you want from this bandura? Contemptuously pointed Eleanor a perfect manicure on the guitar. Your tedious songs are already giving me a headache. Lexi remained silent. She knew that if she opened her mouth and tried to defend herself, she'd be bombarded with insults. It had been done before. Better to remain silent. The stepmother would calm down faster that way. Eleanor was not satisfied with Laurel's passion for music. She repeatedly called the girl talentless, constantly asked to play quietly, as if it was possible, forced stepdaughter to skip lessons at music school. Only here music was a real salvation for the girl. Playing soothed, relaxed, gave joy. There was so little joy in Lexi's life. With her father, of course, Eleanor behaved very differently. Lexi couldn't get used to the metamorphosis. A caring mother, a wonderful hostess, a loving wife, her father often said how lucky he was to have met such a woman. But in fact, Eleanor slowly turned the man against his daughter. Carefully, delicately, masterfully she acted. She appeared to Sami as a worried parent. Lexi is going through puberty. She snaps, she's lazy, she hates everyone around her. She's behind in her schoolwork. She's only thinking about going out and sneaking out of the house. Eleanor said these words to her father, not really caring if Lexi could hear them. The woman didn't care. A man wouldn't believe his daughter's excuses. Eleanor's influence was too strong, too skillful at manipulating those around her. What to do? Sami looked at his wife in puzzlement. He was waiting for advice, help, and support. Of course, the man loved his daughter and didn't want her to lose her way. But Eleanor used persuasive, colorful language. I think she should drop out of music school, the stepmother once suggested. Lexi spends too much time on nonsense and her studies are suffering. I think under the guise of music school, she's hanging out with bad company. I talked to the music teacher. There's a lot of truancy. Father, as usual, agreed. Eleanor's words were always decisive. When Sami informed his daughter that she would no longer be involved in music, Lexi immediately knew whose business it was. It was the first time the girl had openly objected. She was standing up for her life's work, and therefore suddenly became bold and decisive. No, I don't want to quit music school. Eleanor just wants me to spend more time at home and do all the housework. I cook, I clean, I do the laundry. I'm like a maid while you're away. See? Eleanor looked at her husband, confused and worried. See how she reacts? All I'm doing is teaching the child to work. It's nothing special. All normal families have chores. But Lexi just wants to party and be free. It's dangerous at her age. Look at your daughter. Lexi had a temper. She snapped. It played right into Eleanor's hands. She portrayed an understanding woman who wasn't offended by the teenager's temper, but worried about her, wishing her well. Lexi had tried to complain to her father about Eleanor before, but he hadn't taken her words seriously. I mean, his new wife is so perfect, Sami said, stroking his daughter's head. You're just jealous. I'll try to pay more attention to you. No matter what Lexi said, it didn't sound convincing. After all, her father had been constantly manipulated by Eleanor, a skilled manipulator. And after this open fight, Lexi's words didn't matter to Sami at all. At least the girl thought so. By the way, Lexi still had to leave music school. Her father had insisted. The girl lost her only outlet. She did, of course, occasionally play for herself. It somehow relieved the stress that Lexi was now under all the time. Every once in a while, Eleanor pitted father and daughter against each other to consolidate the effect. She played people like chess pieces. The father was at the mercy of his bewitching wife. He was sure that she had made a monster out of his sweet daughter, and he thanked fate that during this difficult period he had an experienced and attentive woman by his side. At first, Lexi still tried to get through to her parent, but every time after that, Eleanor arranged something new. Once, Stacy had taken money from the family stash. Lexi knew it. The girl had heard Stacy begging her mother for money to go on a trip to New York with friends. Eleanor had refused her daughter, explaining that she didn't like the girl's company at all. But Stacy was not used to restrictions. She did go to New York, which made Eleanor furious. She reprimanded her daughter on the phone, threatened and ordered her to return urgently. Of course, Stacy had no intention of obeying. She wasn't that kind of person. Of course, both Eleanor and Lexi understood where the girl had gotten the money Sami's stash. But when her father returned, her stepmother blamed Lexi for everything. Stacy was already home at the time and pretended to be a model high school student. She was like her mother in her acting abilities and even surpassed her. Didn't her father scold his daughter then? Eleanor asked. No, Sami answered. He talked to her for a long time, trying to find out why she needed such a sum of money. Maybe you're in trouble? Maybe you need help? Sami asked. Lexi tried to explain to her parent how things really were. He squeezed her hands even tighter and begged her not to lie to him. Tell the truth, the father pleaded, taking his daughter's hands in his. What's going on with you? Lexi didn't say anything else. It was useless. Her father thinks she is a troubled teenager capable of stealing. What can I say? Eleanor's words have proven to be a powerful tool. A man doesn't trust his daughter but takes his wife's every word at face value. And there was nothing the girl could do about it. As time went on, the moment of Stacy's enrollment in the university was approaching. Lexi realized that the girl would fail miserably. I wonder how her stepmother would explain it to her father. She'd been working hard on her daughter's image all these years. In her stories, she portrayed Stacy as a smart, diligent student, a gifted girl. Eleanor was always comparing the girls, and Stacy always outperformed Lexi in everything. But that's okay, Eleanor urged her wife. If I raised one girl so successfully, I can do the same with your daughter. I know how to raise girls at a certain age. They need a firm hand. Her father agreed with Eleanor and lightheartedly handed over all rights to Lexi's upbringing to her. You know best, he said to his wife. Lexi somehow even got used to this life. The reproaches, the ridicule, the indifference, the shifting of most household duties onto the teenager's shoulders, the restrictions and everything. Lexi sometimes felt like Cinderella. Eleanor was the textbook stepmother. It's true what they say, a tale is a tale with a lie in it. And then, in her father's absence, Vincent, a young man, stylishly dressed, always smiling and polite, began to visit Eleanor. The woman explained to the girls that he was her distant relative. But Vincent looked at Eleanor with such eyes that Lexi knew her stepmother was lying. Stacy didn't believe her mother either. She smiled wryly every time this guest appeared in the house. Now Eleanor could afford not to come home at night. And Lexi knew exactly what was going on. The situation had gone too far. The stepmother had a lover, this same Vincent, young, attractive, charming, in love up to his ears. The girl felt bad for her father. He trusted his wife so much, and she. The girl also tried to understand why Eleanor needed this man. After all, stepmother did not do anything for nothing. If she allowed a man into her circle, it was only to capitalize on it. Vincent came into Eleanor's life for a reason. Maybe it was a matter of feelings, though. The man was good-looking, like the models in the magazines. Even Stacy gave him a special look. Lexi tried to tell her father what was going on. Carefully, she outlined to him the situation with the man who sometimes came to their house in Eleanor's regular absences. Father, he said glumly, are you telling the truth? You're not trying to smear Eleanor again? You're always quarreling. Papa, it's the truth. The girl almost shouted. She felt that her father did not fully believe her, but still she had put doubt in his soul. Of course, Sami had talked to his wife. She must have explained everything in her own way, maybe even complained about Lexi, who supposedly lies all the time and argues with everyone out of a spirit of contradiction. Lexi heard every word her stepmother said. The girl clenched her fists with powerlessness and anger. Eleanor looked and sounded, as always, very convincing, unlike Lexi herself, a resentful, transitional-aged girl with problematic behavior. Sami didn't know what to do. Quit his dream job again and go back to the big time. True, that would be even harder to do now. After all, he was supporting not only himself and his daughter, but also two strangers. He's taken on the responsibility of providing for his family. Lexi's completely out of control. I guess she needs her dad around. But how do you get off the boat? Making a pittance isn't an option anymore. Eleanor is charming, beautiful, smart, sophisticated. Sammy was smitten with this woman at first sight. They met just in time for a mutual friend's anniversary, and then it turned out that Eleanor and Sammy could help each other. It was like a jigsaw puzzle. At first, Lexi was thrilled with her stepmother and stepsister. Her father's eyes lit up with a happy fire. She was so excited to have Eleanor and Stacy move in with them. Then, leaving on the voyage, Sammy was calm. Her daughter was in good hands. Coming home was much more pleasant, too. What happiness it is when you are waiting impatiently for your favorite woman, and even so beautiful. Sammy had forgotten it could be like that. The man envied himself. And then came Lexi's infamous puberty. It was like the kid had been replaced. The girl was now lazy and snappy, lying and skipping classes, trying to argue with her stepmother and father. She made up stories about Stacy, reacted inappropriately to ordinary requests. And once she even took a decent amount of money out of the family piggy bank. Wonder what she needed that kind of money for. Sammy was afraid that his daughter had gotten involved with bad company, especially since Eleanor thought so too. Lexi was always complaining about her stepmother. No wonder she was raising her stepdaughter, restricting her freedom, and oh my, making her clean up after herself. It was much more pleasant to be lazy all day, not bothering with lessons and household chores. To live at your own pleasure. Of course, Eleanor was in the girl's way now. So she rebelled. Sammy understood that, but he didn't know how to help his daughter get through this difficult age with the least possible loss. He'd never understood Lexi at all. It was a shame they didn't give you an instruction manual with your baby. And now Lexi was overstepping her bounds. She hinted that Eleanor had a lover, some Vincent. The wife did not deny it. Indeed, her relative, who had recently moved to their town, had visited them. A busy young man who never took the time to get to know Sammy, working hard, trying to make his way in this life. But Lexi assured him that Eleanor was a lying monster and that Vincent was her lover. Sammy looked into his daughter's honest eyes and was horrified had Lexi become a slanderer and a liar. This was so unlike her. That's when the man decided to install a hidden surveillance camera in the apartment. He's going to record it. The clips will be streamed online to his phone. On his next visit, he'll provide Lexi with proof. She'll see the footage, realize how stupid and ugly her attempts to smear Eleanor look. Maybe then something in her head will click into place, and the girl will come to her senses. Nothing as sobering as looking at yourself from the outside. Sammy didn't expect to see this. At first, he was still feeling guilty, peeking at the homies as if he didn't trust them. That's a good one, I'll say. But the camera footage turned his mind upside down. Eleanor was really treating Lexi like a servant. She looked at her with contempt, made her work for the whole family. And these were impossible chores for a teenager. Lexi didn't just clean up after herself and run errands. She kept the whole house clean, scrubbed, cleaned the plumbing, cooked lunches and dinners, and received only reproaches and insults for it. No, when Sammy was home, Eleanor didn't act like that. The man couldn't believe his eyes. It made his heart bleed when Lexi appeared before him as a disenfranchised Cinderella. Was Eleanor really lying? Lying to him all the time, looking at him with such honest and loyal eyes. Lexi, how many times she tried to get through to her father. He didn't believe a word she said. That's awful. Poor girl. If he could, the man would now travel hundreds of kilometers and protect his daughter. With his own hands, he made his own child's life a nightmare. And the girl had come to him for help. But Sammy didn't believe her. Her daughter's words sounded like pathetic excuses. Lexi's stories about Vincent had also checked out. Indeed, the young man sometimes came to their house, and he hugged Eleanor in an unrelated way. It was as if sparks were flying between Eleanor and Vincent. The camera was good. Sammy could hear every word they said. Vincent turned out to be an experienced and very expensive lawyer. Eleanor couldn't afford him, so she'd gone the usual route, using her strongest charms. Yes, they were lovers. The young lawyer must have been influenced by the natural magnetism of this woman. She, of course, had her own agenda. Sammy soon realized what it was. The plot of land in the village by the river was an inheritance left by his mother to her granddaughter Lexi. Eleanor knew this and was looking for a way to sell the property. She needed the money. Svetlana, her own daughter, would not enter the university on a budget the girl never bothered to study. Eleanor realized that Sami, no matter how much he was in love with her, would never agree to sell Lexi's inheritance. That's why she needed Vincent, as Lexi's guardian. Eleanor had the right to manage her stepdaughter's estate until she came of age. The woman was going to sell the property and use the proceeds to pay for Svetlana's education. But Sami could not know about it. Vincent, as an experienced lawyer, helped his mistress in this case. Eleanor knew how to manipulate people like no one else. Realizing what was happening, Sami clenched his fists in impotent anger. Lexi couldn't be left alone around these horrible people. There's still plenty of time before the end of the business trip, but he'll cut it short. Lexi is in danger. Lexi struggled to hold back her tears. There was no need for Svetlana to see how hard it was for her. She and her mother deliberately drove her to breakdowns. The girl repeatedly made ugly scenes in front of her father, because she couldn't hold it all in. This played into the stepmother's hands. Now Eleanor accused Lexi of vagrancy, carefully creating in her father's eyes the image of a neglectful daughter who was rude and lazy. Lexi had only spent the night at a friend's house. She'd warned Eleanor about it over the phone. "Do whatever you want," her stepmother tossed indifferently into the phone. "I don't care." Of course she didn't care. Lexi had scrubbed the entire apartment the day before and prepared food for a couple days. Otherwise, her stepmother wouldn't have let her out of the house either. When Lexi returned home the next morning, she found police officers in the apartment. At first, the girl thought it was Svetlana. She often disappeared at night, and Eleanor periodically went to get her daughter out of trouble. Found the missing person, the policeman clarified to Eleanor. She nodded her head. That's when Lexi realized what this was all about. Her stepmother had reported to the police that her underage stepdaughter hadn't come home for the night, even though she knew exactly where she was. "I told you I was going to stay at my friend's house," Lexi stretched out in amazement as she looked at her stepmother. The girl had already guessed that the woman had come up with a new way to make her stepdaughter look like a troubled teenager, this time involving the police. "You're cheating again." Sobbing, Eleanor said. "What am I going to do with you? One more trick like that and we'll put her on the register," the policeman warned as he left the apartment. Accounting. That was probably what the stepmother was after. And now Lexi was trying not to cry. She hugged the bear her stepfather had once given her and realized that she would be exposed to her father as a missing girl again. And he, as always, will unconditionally believe his wife, will look at his daughter with sad, anxious eyes. That look, full of pain and disappointment, is so hard to bear. Suddenly, a key turned in the door. Lexi stirred. Who could it be? Svetlana and Eleanor were home. Her father would be at sea for another 3 weeks. Had Eleanor given the key to her Vincent? Just what was missing? But in the hallway came father's voice. "I'm home." "You're back so soon?" Eleanor's voice sounded confused and lusciously joyful at the same time. What happiness. I know everything. Her father clearly did not share her elation. "I've seen and heard everything. Pack your things. You have until this evening. You will do nothing more to my daughter." Lexi's heart raced like a caged bird. She rushed into the hallway and hung around her father's neck. How he found out about everything Lexi would find out later. Right now, it didn't even matter. Sami held his daughter in a tight hug. He smelled like the sea. "Is everything going to be okay now?" the man cooed. "I'm sorry for not believing you. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Maggie wandered reluctantly to the hospital, carrying a child beneath her heart. And as soon as the old woman touched her hand, "You've always been like this, since you were a little girl. All children sit normally. What they're given, they play with. But you always wanted more than the other kids. As if you were better than the others." Maggie was silent. She knew that when stepmother Anastasia was in such a mood, it was best not to argue with her. Actually, Anastasia wasn't a bad woman. At least when she'd started living with Maggie's father and moved into the house with her son Stephen, who was only a year older than Maggie, she'd always given the kids the same fair and square treatment. Stepmother was easily turned on, as Stephen had said, but easily calmed down. Unlike Eden's father, it took some effort to make him angry. But if he got angry, it was everyone, so it was easier for Maggie to admit to her childish pranks right away. It was Anastasia, of course, who was the first to grab her heart and start wailing. "Oh, you freaks did it again. You're not going to clean up this mess. I'm not angry with you. Why? All children are like children, but I have devils, pranksters. After that, the delinquent children were punished, and their misdeed was never mentioned again. But when the stepmother learned that the stepdaughter after graduation is going to enter the city, she could not calm down for a long time. Her father, of course, was not happy either, but as usual, he did not express his feelings. At first, Anastasia hoped that Maggie would come to her senses and stay in her native village, as Stephen had done. But the girl, unlike her half-brother, always knew that her place was not here. She dreamed of going to the city and becoming a fashion designer, clothing designer, or stylist. Maggie didn't know the exact name of her future profession. But she was sure that she would make people beautiful, like her mother Bella Swan. She remembered her mom vaguely. She'd left when Maggie was 7. But when her daughter remembered her, the image of a light fairy from a fairy tale came to mind. Big blue eyes, blonde hair almost as long as Maggie's own. Slim figure, fair skin, gentle voice and dreamy gaze. In their village, Mama Bella Swan seemed like a creature from another world. She didn't know how to dig a garden or milk a cow. Daddy Eden did all the housework. Sometimes his grandmother, his mother, helped. She did not like her daughter-in-law, who was not adapted to country life, and often remembered with unkind words the day her son brought her from the city. Mama Bella Swan liked to do only 2 things: bake and sew clothes. And she did the former while sewing. Maggie still kept her childhood dresses made by her mom's hands. Except that when Maggie was 7, her mom disappeared. The girl could not understand what happened for a long time. She kept asking her father where her mother was and when she would return. He was silent. The grandmother gave the answer. "She left you?" "She left me. She ran back to the city. She couldn't live here. I told Eden as soon as he brought her back, I told him she wasn't right for you. She's so blissful. She doesn't belong here. I hope I'll grow up okay with you at least." Probably in order for her granddaughter to grow up normal, Grandmother Anna found her son a second wife herself. Simple, economical, experienced in the family business. Anastasia, she said to Eden, is a normal woman. She has already given birth to a son, kept everything and nothing. She can manage such a household on her own. Let's join her yard with yours and we'll live like people. The son obeyed and got married. And though in some ways Anastasia had replaced Maggie's mother, the girl had never forgotten her mother. Somewhere deep inside, she was sure that she would find her mother when she came to town. Surely she had already become the most famous fashion designer, and her daughter would be the same. They will meet at some fashion show, and her mother will immediately recognize her and be proud of her. And now, finally, that day has come. Even her stepmother's loud displeasure as she walked her to the bus couldn't dampen her mood today. Anastasia put her stepdaughter in what she thought was the best seat. She made sure the old brown leather suitcase was squeezed firmly between the seats. "All right," she said sternly, glancing glumly out the window. "You write there how to settle in." Suddenly the stepmother bent down sharply and awkwardly kissed her stepdaughter on the cheek. Then, as if frightened, she also abruptly recoiled and got off the bus. Maggie could see her rapidly receding back through the window. She's a good girl after all, she thought suddenly, even though she's not a mom. Maggie once again scrutinized the list from beginning to end. Her last name was not there. "Didn't get in?" sympathetically asked a short, skinny red-haired girl wearing funny glasses with repair tape instead of frames. "It was just a mistake," Maggie said confidently. "I'm sure I did." The red-haired girl shrugged her shoulders. "If you're sure, go to the dean. He has all the lists. If you want, I'll walk you there." Maggie nodded. As they walked down the narrow, dark hallway, she asked, "What's your name?" "Trixie, short for Taisia." "And I'm Maggie, short for Maria." "And you got in here?" The girl laughed in surprise. "No, but I didn't apply here." "Then what are you doing here?" "I was just passing by. It's hot outside, so I thought I'd come in and sit for a while. It's interesting to look at applicants, how they are happy, sad, studying this list with such hope that it hurts." Maggie was surprised at this way of spending her time, but she decided not to let it show. They were just approaching the dean's office. "Come on," Trixie encouraged her. "I'll wait for you here." Maggie knocked gently. A muffled voice came from the other side of the door. "Come in." A short, stout, gray-haired man with glasses sat in the office. "Yes, yes," he asked cheerfully without raising his head. "What is the question?" "I'm about enrollment. It seems that they forgot to put me on the list of those who passed the exams." The dean raised his head and looked at the girl in surprise. "Last name, first name, middle name?" "Bella Swan." "Just a moment." The dean pulled up a thick pile of sheets with students' names on them, flipped through it, found the right one, and read it carefully from beginning to end, frowned and looked at Maggie. "There is no mistake, Bella Swan. You didn't get in." "Not even close to a passing grade," he added softly, seeing the girl's frustrated face. "Try again next year, but prepare properly, okay?" Maggie nodded and walked out of the office. Trixie, as promised, was waiting for her in the corridor, looking at the stand with the history of the department with interest. "What's up?" she asked. "Did you figure it out?" Maggie nodded, feeling tears come to her eyes. "We're done. I didn't get in." "Oh man, I sympathize." Trixie looked at her sympathetically. "Don't worry, you'll get in next year. My older sister got into Moscow State University only for the second time. Nothing. She graduated with a red diploma." Maggie smiled languidly. "Great. Come on, let's get out of here." Outside, as it happened, it was especially nice. The sun was shining dazzlingly, the birds were singing. The flowers in the flower near the university filled the air with a lusciously sweet fragrance. It was as if no one in the world cared that her dreams had just been shattered. "Where are you going?" Trixie asked. "Maybe we should go the same way." "Actually, I'd like a coffee and a snack right now. What do you think of the offer?" "I'm going to the train station," Maggie said, and shook the hand she was holding her suitcase with a slight shake. "I'm not from here. I came from the village." "Oh, how long does it take to get home?" 4 hours by bus." "No relatives here?" Maggie wanted to say mom but held herself back and shook her head negatively. Trixie looked at her pensively, as if she were thinking about something. Finally, she asked, "Do you want to go back home to the village?" "No." "Then let's go for coffee, and then we'll figure it out." They walked to the little red car, threw the suitcase in the trunk. "It won't be comfortable for coffee," Trixie said. They ordered coffee without getting out of the car. They just drove up to some window. Trixie dictated the order, and almost immediately a smiling girl in a uniform gave them everything. Maggie didn't even know they could do that. "It's good," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "Thank you for the treat." "You're welcome. What was your plan in case you didn't get in?" Maggie sighed and lowered her eyes. "I didn't have a plan." "Oh boy. Are you really such a naive country girl? What kind of life did you expect?" Maggie put the paper cup in the cup holder and opened the car door. "Thanks for the coffee. I'm going to go." Trixie laughed and grabbed her arm. "Okay, I'm sorry. It's not like I said that to hurt your feelings. It's just that life is so unpredictable. You have to be prepared for anything." The naive country girl sighed and sat back down. "I don't want to go back to the village, Trixie. It's the only option I have. I thought I'd study, live in a dormitory, get a scholarship, then get a job." "Well, you can stay at my place, get a job, and study for your degree at the same time." Maggie looked at her incredulously. "Why would you do that?" The girl shrugged her thin, pale shoulders, covered with freckles. "Why not?" After saying that, she started the car and drove Maggie to her house. Trixie lived in a large 2-bedroom apartment on the first floor of an old 9-story building. It must have been renovated about 20 years ago. But as soon as Maggie walked in, she immediately felt the cozy atmosphere. It was obvious that Trixie had grown up here, and everything was the same as it had been when she was a child. In the first room was a piano with stacks of yellowed sheets of sheet music on it. Next to it was an old chair upholstered in cracked brown leather, the swivel leg of which creaked with every movement. Opposite the instrument, an old and slightly worn sofa stood against the wall, and above it hung bookshelves with a few photo frames mixed in with old novels with yellowed pages. "Your parents?" Maggie asked. Trixie nodded. "Why is Daddy in that weird suit?" "He's playing Boris Godunov. He's an actor, an opera singer." "Wow, that's great. Who's Mom?" "A diplomat." "So is my older sister." "Wow." Trixie shrugged her shoulders. "Let's keep looking." "Come on." The second room was a bedroom. There was a big bed, a tall, ceiling-high wooden closet, and shelves full of dolls. Mom brought them back from every trip, Trixie explained. Maggie remembered that she had only had 2 dolls as a child. The first was a bald rubber puffball that she thought her mom had bought for her. The second was a Barbie doll her stepmother had given her for some New Year's Eve gift. "I think you'll live in the third room," Trixie said thoughtfully. "It's kind of like a guest room." The third room had a fold-out couch, a wide dark dresser, and a television on top of it. A desk and chair took up almost all the rest of the space. "Thank you," Maggie said and set the suitcase down. "Okay, go ahead and unpack and grab the towels and linens from the dresser. Don't be shy." "In the bathroom. The toilet is just to the right of the front door. Get some rest. Maybe you need to sleep or just lie down. I'll do my own thing. I'll take the boys out tonight." Maggie had never been to a country house, especially one so big and beautiful. The huge 3-story brick house was full of cheerful young guys and girls, most of whom seemed to her too tipsy because of drinking and loud music. She felt like a stranger in this company. Trixie introduced Maggie to everyone, introducing her as her new friend and future clothing designer. Maggie smiled shyly and wished she could fall through the ground. She didn't remember anyone. All the cheerful faces seemed equally alien. Absent-mindedly taking the plastic cup of wine in her hand, she stepped aside. Then she saw the back door to the yard open and slipped through it. It was much quieter outside. Sure, there was some hugging couple sitting on a bench near the porch. But farther back in the garden, where a white gazebo stood between the trees, there seemed to be no one. That's where Maggie went. She sat down on a bench, put a glass of wine on the railing, and closed her eyes. Why is such a beautiful girl sad all alone? A pleasant male voice sounded directly above her. Maggie opened her eyes and saw a tall, handsome guy. Taylor. He introduced himself. "Maggie." "Nice to meet you," she replied. "So what are you missing?" Taylor asked. "I don't know anyone there. We've all still had a lot to drink," Maggie admitted. Taylor raised his eyebrows and scratched the back of his head. "I'm sober, and we just met," he said, and sat down next to her. "Is it nice out here?" "Yes, it is," Maggie agreed. Taylor's eyes did seem completely sober, big, dark eyes that stared at her so intently that Maggie felt hot and cold at the same time. She wished he'd go away or sit here with her until morning. "Well, get up, you're late for work." Maggie knocked insistently on her friend's door. No one answered. Sighing, the girl pushed the door open and entered. Her friend was sleeping sweetly, covered with a blanket, with only her left heel sticking out from underneath. Maggie almost rolled her until she woke up with a squeal and threw the blanket to the floor. "She's awake," Maggie said with satisfaction. Her friend sat up on the bed and wiped her eyes unhappily. "Where did you get all that strength, Maggie? I heard you were back in the morning again." "I was out with Taylor. Haven't you had enough of him for a month?" Maggie smiled embarrassedly. "And you were reading again until the wee hours of the morning. Did you want something interesting?" "Yeah, Eden gave me his new novel to review. It's still a draft, but it's entertaining." "Okay, let's eat breakfast quickly. I can drop you off at work. Then you wash up," Maggie said. "I'll make breakfast. I'll put it on the table." In the kitchen, her friend asked, "Did you ever regret working as a janitor? Just tell me. I'll find you something more suitable." Maggie shook her head. "No, I like everything. And there's a lot to learn," she said simply. "For real." Maggie squared her shoulders proudly, head held high. Maggie said. Concal. I'm also there washing windows and taking out the trash. I'm not afraid of hardship. But seriously, continued the proud cleaning lady, there's definitely a lot to learn. Even just by listening to Anastasia yell at her assistants. Well, I won't interfere with your learning process, she grinned. When Maggie woke up in her new friend Stephanie's apartment after a weekend at the cottage, it was clear to her that she needed to look for a job. Even though Stephanie had said she didn't have to pay for housing, she still needed money for groceries, transportation, and everything else. And Maggie wasn't used to living on her own. But where would they take a young girl without education and residence registration? For some reason at that moment, Maggie remembered the words of her stepmother, who told her son Stephen, who had finished school and now didn't know where to go to work. Work is like mushrooms. They're always and everywhere full of them. If you want to find a job, go outside and look around. That's what Maggie did. She walked around for 2 hours, exploring the city, admiring the tall buildings, large green parks. When she was tired and went home, her eyes fell on a small ad full-time cleaning lady needed at Bella Swan Fashion House. Maggie went to the address listed. The Bella Swan Fashion House sign was visible from afar, huge, sleek white glossy letters on a black background. A high white marble porch led through transparent doors into a room with a ceiling on which Maggie could see paintings, flowers, clouds, angels, warriors on horseback, just like in a church. She had a thought to look more closely, but she felt dizzy and hastily lowered her gaze. Young lady, who are you here to see? A high-pitched woman's voice sounded. A slender woman in an airy white blouse and a very tight black skirt approached her. Hello, Maggie said. I'm here to see you. Do you need a cleaner? Yes, came a dry voice from somewhere in the back of the room. Only we have very strict requirements. Not everyone can do it. The woman nodded, indicating with her eyes for Maggie to follow her. Together they walked through a completely empty whitewashed hall, save for the mannequins and clothes racks along the walls. At the back of the room stood a massive wooden table, piled with piles of colorful pieces of fabric, buttons of all different shapes and sizes, ribbons, belts, and more. Behind the table was a large black leather armchair where a woman in her 60s was sitting and smoking. She had very short gray hair and attentive black eyes that examined Maggie from head to toe. I'm ready to start work today, Maggie said. Cassandra grinned. Actually, we have one requirement: to clean well and do as we're told. That goes without saying. It's not even up for discussion. The main thing is to be inconspicuous, a quiet mouse. I can do that, Maggie Shmilova said confidently. She looked at her assistant. Stephanie, did you hear her? Get the girl processed. Cassandra took a drag on her cigarette. They ducked into a black leather folder with some drawings and photos. Let's go quietly, Maggie whispered to Stephanie with just her lips. So the girl who had come from the village a few days ago got into one of the best fashion houses in the city, even as a cleaner. Only after seeing everything from the inside, Maggie realized how much her ideas about style, fashion, clothing design differed from reality. It became clear why she hadn't been accepted. It required a lot more than she thought. Maggie fulfilled Cassandra's requirement to be quieter than water. Lower than grass, she silently wiped mirrors, checking for dust, collecting fabric scraps. Maggie caught every word of her boss, tried to memorize every image created in the studio. And though she worked every day from morning till evening, she didn't feel tired at all. Especially since Taylor picked her up in the evenings. Maggie had never met anyone like him before. He was amazingly energetic, cheerful, and always in a good mood. All the men Maggie had seen in her home village, whether they were 15 or 50, were always preoccupied with one thing: where to make money and how much booze to buy with it. Also, tomorrow was a day off. Taylor had promised to pick her up tonight and surprise her. She didn't feel like getting up in the morning. It had been a busy month, and Maggie didn't want to miss the opportunity to lie in bed as long as she wanted. She'd never had that at home. Her stepmother always woke her and her roommate up at the crack of dawn and came up with a job. Maggie still remembered the night before her birthday, molding dumplings all morning. The thought of change made her nauseous. The girl opened her eyes, stretched, and sleep finally left her, and an unpleasant sensation originating somewhere in her stomach traveled up her esophagus. Maggie jumped up and ran to the bathroom. Trixie, she said indignantly to her friend, walking into the kitchen. "I can smell from the room that these eggs are stale." "Why? You're frying them." Trixie looked up from her book in surprise, looked at her friend, stood up, walked over to the skillet, and sniffed her nose. "I bought them yesterday. What makes you think they're stale?" "The smell of them made me sick." Maggie opened the window wide, the fresh air making her feel better. Trixie frowned. "When were you supposed to get your period?" Maggie didn't immediately realize what her friend meant. "I don't know," she answered, confused. "I think it should have started by now." "I wonder. Take a test. Get one from my shelf in the bathroom." "I don't know how to do them." Trixie sighed. "Come on, I'll tell you." A little while later, when Trixie had already put breakfast on plates, having first drained the butter from her portion into her porridge, she returned to the kitchen. "Positive," Trixie said. "Wow, I don't know what to say. Depends on whether you were expecting it or not." "I wasn't," Maggie admitted honestly. "But I'm really excited, and I think Taylor will be happy too." "Well, that's great. So I finally got to meet him. He's picking me up tonight. I'll ask him to come over." "All right, pregnant woman. Let's have breakfast." All day Maggie was in high spirits. She was surprised by the news, but it felt like it was meant to be. She still had to tell her father and stepmother. At that moment, Maggie remembered that she had not yet written to them as she had promised. They don't even know she didn't get in, and they probably think Maggie is the same old student. She felt ashamed. How could she have forgotten to write to them? Her dad probably thinks she left him, or even ran away like her mom. She also remembered Anastasia kissing her goodbye and asking her to write. Okay, at least she had a story to tell now. She has a job, she's actively preparing for college. There's a fiancé, there's going to be a baby. This evening, Taylor was running late. He was supposed to pick her up another half-hour ago. "Let's call," Trixie said. "What if his car broke down or something?" "I don't have his phone number," Maggie said. "How come?" "I don't know. I didn't get it somehow. We saw each other almost every day and agreed in advance when we'd see each other next time. And during the day we're both at work, so we don't have time to talk." Trixie frowned. "Do you know where he works?" "No." "Okay, what's his last name?" "No, I didn't ask." Okay, Trixie came over to her friend, gave her a hug. "Let's wait till tomorrow. If he doesn't show up, we can go to his house." Maggie paced the room. "Trixie, what if something happened to him?" "Maggie, what could have happened to him? Even if it did, you wouldn't know about it. So we wait till tomorrow and then we go." She didn't sleep much that night. Images of Taylor getting into a car accident, being attacked by bullies, or the rope breaking in the elevator he was riding in came to mind. She slept for a couple hours and woke up early feeling completely wrecked. "Trixie," she knocked gently on the door of that room's door. "Sunday at 0800. Let's get at least another hour of sleep." "Let's go, please. I can't take it anymore." Okay, Trixie stretched sleepily and looked at her worried friend carefully. "I can't say no to a pregnant woman." No one opened the door for him. Maggie was nervous. She was already pounding desperately on the door, palms smacking away. She hadn't taken her finger off the bell button for probably 5 minutes before that. Trixie stood by her side and grew increasingly gloomy. "We should probably call the police," Maggie said. "What if he's lying there unconscious on the floor?" "Yeah," Trixie said in a strange, colorless tone. At that moment, the door to the apartment across the hall opened. "Why all the noise in the morning?" A sleepy woman in her 40s in a robe asked unhappily. "I'm sorry," Maggie turned to her. "It's just that the guy who lives here won't answer the door. We're worried something's happened to him." "Why are you looking for him?" the neighbor asked even more unhappily. "He moved out yesterday." "Moved out how?" "He ordered a car in silence. They carried some things all evening. He came out with the bags himself." "It wasn't his apartment?" Trixie asked. "No, of course not. He must have rented it for a year or so." I see, Trixie said. Thank you, we'll be on our way. She took Maggie firmly by the elbow and led her toward the elevator. The roommate hummed and slammed the door shut. I don't get it, Maggie said as they rode home. How could he leave like that without a word? Trixie pressed her lips together and gripped the steering wheel even tighter. It was like she'd been fighting herself for a while, but she still said it. Maggie, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I think there's nothing wrong with Taylor. He was just using you while it suited him. And now he's probably moved on to other things and other women. How can you say that about him? Trixie twisted the steering wheel sharply and braked. She turned to her friend, glaring at her. Maggie, wake up. Do you think it's normal to date a man for a month and not know anything about him? No last name, no place of employment, no phone number? Do you think it was an accident? Maggie was silent. Trixie saw tears running down the girl's cheeks. All the anger went away at once. I'm sorry, baby, Trixie said. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just can't have you living in an illusion and making excuses for him. The tears rolled down as if on their own. My head felt empty. Strangely, Maggie felt no pain at that moment. On the contrary, everything inside her felt frozen. Shit. I wish I could come with you, Trixie sighed. They're the ones who'll tell us the sex of the baby today. Yeah, Maggie said, trying to button her long, narrow-down jacket. And don't worry about the ultrasound, I feel great, and it's only 4 bus stops from work. By the way, how did the fashion house feel about your pregnancy? Maggie sighed. Cassandra doesn't know yet. She doesn't see anything but outfits, I think. And she certainly won't be looking at some cleaning lady. Alice, on the other hand, is guessing, even though I've widened my uniform and I'm less conspicuous. She's giving me weird looks. I guess I'll be able to hide it for a month or two, and then it's over. I'm afraid they'll fire me if they find out. It's illegal, Trixie said. So don't worry, if they do, I'll send the labor inspectorate after them. In fact, I told you you can stay with me as long as you want, even when you're not working. You can't go back to the country. Have you written to your parents? I just told them I didn't get in and got a job. And? Are they arguing, calling you back? Oddly enough, no, Maggie grinned. My stepmother actually answered the letter. I don't know what my father said, but she says I'm doing great and I'll definitely get in next year. It's kind of scary, to be honest. Well, she probably missed you and compared how to live without the help of a second woman in the house. We should go see them, but later. All right, I'm off to work. I'll see you tonight. It seems Swan noticed a change in her co-worker's appearance today, after all. Here's the revised text. Even though Maggie tried to turn her back, Swan did notice her changed figure. When the workday was over, she called Maggie into her office. Is she going to fire me? Maggie thought, wiping her sweaty palms on her pants. She will. Swan was smoking as usual and looking at the sketches on the desk in front of her. Sit down, she said, pointing to the chair beside her. Maggie sat down, trying to retract her stomach as much as possible, which of course was no longer retracting. This or this? Swan asked, running up to her 2 pictures for the window display. Yes, the centerpiece will be standing in the center of. This Maggie pointed confidently to the left photo. It looks more flamboyant. The second image looks casual. And this one reflects the collection you've been working on. And also, I think it puts you in a New Year's mood. People will look at it and immediately think that the holiday is coming soon. Not bad, Swan said thoughtfully, looking at the picture again. By the way, I called you here for a reason. It's about to start, Maggie thought. Would you like to be a junior assistant in the future? Maggie looked at her boss in surprise. She looked completely serious. I do. Good. Don't be surprised. Alice told me about his plans to go into the fashion world. I'm not blind myself. I see that you do not miss a single word. Even with a belly floor and so on cannot help, sighed Swan. I'm old, of course, but I'm not blind yet. So you're not going to fire me? Maggie asked cautiously. Have you been listening to anything I've said? No, get out of here, work while you can. Swan abruptly opened the sketchbook and stared at it. Maggie knew better than to approach her boss at times like this. She stood up carefully, whispered a thank you, and walked out. The bus was long gone. Maggie stepped from foot to foot to keep warm. Besides her, there was only a little old lady at the bus stop. Though Maggie didn't like to stare at strangers, this woman caught her eye. She was wearing a long red plaid wool coat, and in her arms sat a large black cat that watched Maggie closely with big green eyes. Finally, the bus pulled up and Maggie and the old woman got on. Pay up. At the entrance, the driver shouted so sharply that the girl almost dropped her bag. She paid, went through, and sat on the first seat of the empty bus. The old woman stopped in the aisle, grabbed the cat, and began to look for something in a small beaded black purse. Well, the driver asked impatiently. Now, just a minute, the old woman replied politely. A coin has fallen somewhere. Probably the lining is loose. The driver sighed noisily. The old woman searched her bag even harder. The cat meowed unhappily. Take it, said Maggie, holding out the money to the driver. He hummed, but said nothing. The girl returned to her seat. The old woman sat down next to her. Thank you, my dear. You're welcome. Can you tell me when the stop factory is? I get off at the polyclinic. Just before it, I'll tell you. Are you going for an ultrasound? The old lady asked. How did you guess? The woman smiled, stroked the cat, and pointed at Maggie's belly with her eyes. Stomach. It's not hard to do. Almost no one notices yet. It's not a long time. Especially since I have an experienced eye. I can tell you something else interesting. The black cat suddenly stood up, pulled himself up, and climbed from the old woman's lap to Maggie's lap. That's a good sign, said his mistress. Usually he doesn't approach strangers. Did he like you? Maggie stroked the cat. His fur was warm, almost hot. What did you want to tell me? The old woman smiled, closed her eyes, and suddenly began to sway slightly back and forth. You were an accidental child yourself, but you brought much joy with your birth. You will find your mother twice more. The first time hard, then for real. The path you've chosen now is the right one. Follow it, Ivan's daughter, and don't go back to the past. Look to the future. The old woman's voice was quiet and smooth, as if she had put Maggie into some kind of trance. She heard everything, understood everything, but it was as if time had slowed down. Every word of the unexpected prediction was etched in her memory. Girl, came the familiar rough voice of the driver. Girl, the clinic, you're getting off here. Maggie looked out the window. Yes, it was the right stop. She hadn't even noticed the bus had stopped. And the amazing thing was that the old lady and her cat were no longer on the next seat. The fetus is developing perfectly. All the indicators are normal. I don't see any pathology. The doctor, a young beautiful girl, was always friendly to Maggie, called her mommy, and always told her in clear words what she was doing and what the results of the examination were. Mommy, do you want to know the sex of the baby? Of course, Maggie said quietly, it's a girl, Eden's daughter. And name it. Maggie remembered the old woman's words. Knew what? The doctor interrogated. Nothing, that's just it. You say you're all right? Yes. How do you feel? Maggie smiled. I feel great. I feel like I have more energy and strength. That's wonderful. How much longer can I work? You'll have to see how you feel. You're good for now. At home, Maggie was glad to lie on the couch and close her eyes. At last she could relax after an eventful day and think about everything. She could hardly define her attitude to fortune-tellers, clairvoyants, and other mystics. Though, of course, her upbringing in the village had left its mark. For example, Maggie remembered well how her stepmother periodically put a saucer of milk and a lump of sugar for the housekeeper. To keep the house in order, she explained to little Maggie. The children even tried several times to see the housekeeper. Once, after waiting for their parents to fall asleep, Stephen and Maggie snuck out of the room, and hid behind the stove so that they could see the white saucer on the floor. Even after the house was completely dark, the saucer was dimly lit. They sat there until they fell asleep, but they never saw anything. But then there was less milk, and the sugar was chewed. One must properly remember what it was the old woman had said about Eden's daughter. And name it. Eden Smith. Beautiful, thought Maggie. Every time she remembered Eden, her heart clenched painfully. Maggie habitually dropped her hand to her stomach. She wouldn't admit it to Grace, but somewhere deep inside her, she still had hope that Eden would come back. She'd even dreamed about him a few times. She'd wake up to find him in her bed, or he'd come to her work, or he'd ring the doorbell. The bottom line was the same Eden was telling her that it wasn't his fault that he had to leave her. Now he was back, and they would be together forever. And then Maggie woke up alone in a big empty bed every time. You'll find your mother twice more. The first time hard, then for real she remembered the old woman's words. It was unclear what the second part meant, but it was best to focus on the first. She would find her mom. Somehow, with everything that had happened, finding her mother had taken a back seat. Maybe that's what she should do now, go see her father. He probably knows mom's relatives, friends, her old place of employment, or some addresses. Strange she hadn't thought of that before. About the putsch and the fact that one should look to the future, not the past, is not very clear yet, but she would think about that later. Maggie had a strange feeling as the bus pulled into her home village. She felt at the same time as if she had never left here, and as if she had never been here. These little old wooden houses smelled merrily of smoke from their chimneys. Shaggy dogs barked at the bus. Women in warm shawls and men in fur hats seemed near and far at the same time. It was as if Maggie had seen it all some time ago in a past life. She walked along the familiar streets and felt like a daughter who had returned to her homeland after years of wandering and hardship. But when she saw the house, she realized how much had changed in those 6 months. She had left here as a little girl, yesterday's schoolgirl, and returned as a future mother. Maggie's here, came the voice of her half-brother. Stephen was chopping wood. When he saw her, he dropped the axe right there on the woodpile and ran toward her, huge, with ruddy cheeks and hair sticking to his forehead. He rushed to his sister, hugged her tightly, lifted her up, and whirled her around. Stephen let go. Maggie laughed. I'm very glad to see you too. My parents are home. Let's go home. They went into the house. Stephen put his huge arm around her shoulder and didn't want to let her go the whole way. Maggie suddenly thought that she hadn't even written to him once during this time, and she felt ashamed. Her half-brother had always treated her like a sibling. At home, she saw her stepmother first. She was standing at the flour-covered table, kneading dough as usual. Her father was nowhere to be seen, probably sitting in the TV room. Mom, Maggie's here. Anastasia turned her head and gasped. For a moment it seemed to Maggie that her stepmother was glad to see her, and even as if she were about to hug her stepdaughter. But after a second, as if she had come to her senses, she put her hands to her sides and said angrily, "Well, look who has come to us." Not a word in 6 months. And here, unannounced, in broad daylight, she just dropped in like snow on our heads. The stepmother took a noisy breath, as if gaining air, and continued to grumble. "Why did you get up? As if it was the first time you came here to the stove. Hurry up and come in. I'm freezing." Her nose is white. "Stephen, make her some raspberry tea." Father appeared in the kitchen. He wiped his eyes in confusion and did not immediately realize what had caused the commotion. When he saw his daughter, he didn't even smile. "Hi, Daddy," Maggie said and hugged him. Her father gave her an odd hum and barely hugged her back. "Stay in your room for a while," Anastasia commanded. "We'll have dinner soon." Maggie and her father and brother went into the hall. It had been a long time ago. Anyway, they met when your father Eden came to New York for driver's training. I think he liked your mom Bella right away. Eden said he didn't understand why she was attracted to him. It was obvious she was from a wealthy family. I remember there was a strange story. She had a fight with her parents, or they'd moved away or died. Anyway, she and Eden hit it off real quick. And by the time he had passed his exams and was about to leave, she was the first to propose to him, "I want to live with you, and I want to live in the country." Maggie was surprised. For some reason, she had always thought that her father had tricked, or maybe through force, dragged her mother to the village. Then it became clear that the bride was pregnant. They were quickly married. Then you were born. And when she left, you might remember, you weren't so little. Maggie nodded. She remembered it very well. Didn't your father say why she left? Anastasia shrugged her shoulders. He only said that it quickly became clear to him that she didn't belong here. At first, Eden hoped that his wife would adjust to the village life. He took care of all the housework and sat with you whenever he could. But no, your mother was very homesick. It was as if nothing pleased her. Not even me, Maggie said quietly. Anastasia reached out as if she wanted to pet her, but halfway through she pulled her hand back. Eden said she loved you. That's why she lived with him for so many years. But she was getting worse every day. He knew that one day she would leave, and so she did. I want to find her, Maggie said. There must be some addresses, phone numbers, where she lived when they met. And her parents are my grandparents. Didn't they ever come to visit us? No, my father said. He came in unnoticed, and the women even flinched at the sound of his voice. Eden sighed heavily, sat down on a vacant chair and began to tell the story, looking directly at his daughter. I tried to find her. There were no cell phones back then. The only address I knew was her then apartment, which she rented with a friend. 8 years later, other people were living there, and no one had heard of your mother. I never saw her parents either. I think she had a big fight with them and hadn't spoken to them for months when I met her. I don't even know if they know they have a granddaughter. I don't think she had any contact with anyone from the city while she lived in the village. Her parents seemed to be very rich people. That's all the information I have. So there's no way to find her? Maggie asked. Her father frowned. If she wanted to, she could have come here herself after all these years. If not to me, then at least to you. Or at least send her a birthday card. The trip to the village left Maggie with mixed impressions. She'd hoped so much to find a clue to her mother's whereabouts. And as much as she wanted to deny her father's words, they stabbed her very sorely. Surely her mother could have visited her in so many years. And since she hadn't, she didn't want to see her. All right, she'd have a daughter of her own soon. She has to take care of Masha too, Trixie asked her, telling her how she had traveled. After listening to her friend's long story, she sighed. What can I say? Your father is probably right. And really, you've got a lot of other things to do right now. There's a promotion coming up at work. Yeah, Maggie smiled as the thought of the job felt good. Of course, it's only called a junior assistant. In reality, there would be almost no difference in salary. Yes, and the work would consist mostly of serve and fetch. Stephanie also promised a theory test. You'll pass, Trixie said confidently. It's okay, everyone starts small, but you'll be one step closer to your dream. It's not like scrubbing floors. You're right, as always, Maggie agreed. All in all, I'm fine with it. I just miss Jason sometimes. Maggie glanced at Trixie, knowing she'd be unhappy at the mention of her estranged fiancé, but she made a sudden suggestion. I was thinking maybe we should ask people we know who were at the cottage the summer you met. Someone must have taken him there. They must know his close friends. Maybe parents, siblings? Don't, Trix. I was thinking the same thing. It's the same thing with Mom. If he wanted to, he would have contacted me a long time ago. But if I find him, what am I going to say? Hey, Jason, you bastard. Here's our daughter. Pay child support. Maggie shook her head. Well, no. Chloe is my daughter. I don't want him to have any rights over her. I raised her myself. If she asks who her father is, I'll tell her everything I know. Trixie sighed. Okay, that's up to you. I'll help you in any way I can. Thank you. The exam at Stephanie's Maggie seemed perfectly easy. Even though Cassandra's assistant Marissa kept a nonchalant expression on her face, it was obvious that she was pleased. Lastly, she led the girl into the holy of holies of their fashion house, the so-called dressing room. Essentially a huge room with countless racks of clothes, shoes, and accessories. Their Stephanie had asked her to put together a few sets for different occasions. Maggie did it. "Well, congratulations," Stephanie said. "By the way, when is your due date?" "About the beginning of April." "Well, that's not soon enough." "Oh, that's great. Just in time to model in the spring show of Cassandra's new collection." "Model?" Maggie thought she heard wrong. "I'm not a model. And I've got a huge belly already." "It'll be just what you need," Stephanie said nonchalantly. "Cassandra is currently designing a maternity collection. She wants to present it in late winter or early spring." "And she wants you as a model?" Maggie wondered. "Oh, wow, but I'm not a professional model." "It's no big deal," Stephanie assured her. "We'll get you ready. There's plenty of time. In the meantime, here's a list of new responsibilities. Starting tomorrow, you're no longer a cleaning lady but a junior assistant. Basically, you're doing the same thing as, say, me or Cassandra. You'll have to prepare clothes, shoes, coordinate fittings, make appointments, make sure all supplies are in sufficient quantities, and a lot of other things. By the way, how long do you plan to work?" "As long as I can," Maggie replied. "I feel great, and the doctor said it's okay." "That's good. Of course, after the birth, you'll go on maternity leave. We all understand that. But keep in mind that Cassandra won't be waiting for anyone for 3 years, or even a year and a half." "I understand," Maggie replied. She didn't really know what to do. Trixie couldn't babysit, she was working, and there was no money for a nanny. Who else would she ask? Eden. I don't think he'd do it. All right, she'd think of something. For a moment she thought Trixie was right, and she could find Taylor and ask him for help. He obviously didn't need the money. But Maggie felt sick to her stomach at the thought of him turning her down, lying, making excuses, or saying it wasn't his child. Surely he was counting on never seeing her again. No, Maggie wouldn't impose. There was plenty of work to do in her new position. Maggie even sometimes thought that if she had stayed as a cleaner, she would have moved much less. But the girl did not complain. She felt great. And at work she was ready to spend the night. And everything went easily and well with her, as it happens when a person is engaged in his work. Of course, pregnancy made its own adjustments. It was necessary to visit doctors, go to courses for pregnant women, buy things and furniture for the future baby. And then there is also preparation for the future enrollment and work. And with her friend Maggie tried to go out at least once a week. "Doesn't it feel weird?" she asked Trixie. "You and I are basically complete strangers to each other. We met by chance, and now I've been living in your apartment for 6 months. I've got a baby on the way. Of course, for me, you are an angel who came from heaven and saved me in the most difficult moment. Without you, I would have been sitting in the village, listening to my stepmother in Eden, milking cows. I'll always be grateful to you. But sometimes I feel like a parasite who has come to trust a good man, who lives at the expense of another." Her friends were sitting in front of the TV at that moment, watching some old romantic comedy and eating ice cream straight out of big plastic vases. Trixie cradled her spoon and shrugged. "No, this situation doesn't seem weird to me at all. Are you tricking me, plotting to nail me and clean me out, or re-sign the apartment over to you?" "No," Maggie answered, surprised by the strange questions. "That's it," Trixie said. "I'm helping you because I want to and I can do it. Remember, a person only helps you if they want to help you. Because we always have the right to say no. I like being your friend. I'm not the easiest person to get along with. Even if it doesn't seem that way at first glance. And you, how can I put it? You balance me out well. I don't feel any discomfort at your being here. On the contrary, it's a joy." "Thank you, Trix. I hope someday I'll be able to return the favor." "You're already paying," the girl said, "buying groceries and cleaning the house. I don't even have to mention the fact that you've practically freed me from cooking. And that's something I hate. But in the future I plan to tell everyone that I once lived with a celebrity from the world of high fashion." Maggie laughed. "Tell me about it. And I like cooking. I'm also thinking about the future when my daughter is born. I will stay at home for the first time. I don't know, a month, 2, 3, Maggie said. Stephanie made it clear that Cassandra would not wait for me 3 or even a year and a half out of maternity leave. Wait, Trixie clarified. I thought you'd be gaining experience with them through the summer until you went to college. There's a part-time program there. Then I could stay on and work at the fashion house. Yes, that would be ideal, of course, but I'm just dreaming. Maggie sighed sadly. I haven't yet had the opportunity to prove myself enough for Cassandra to say yes. That's our future star. I'll keep her on any terms. The friends laughed. First of all, Trixie urged, there's no harm in dreaming. Especially if the dreams are backed up by action. And yours are definitely backed up. Think about it. 6 months ago, you were a naive little country girl. I'm sorry, but you were. Maggie nodded, showing that she took no offense and agreed with her friend's words. And now you are a young, confident mother-to-be, working in the most fashionable house in the city. Not a bad leap. And secondly, at the end of winter you will have some kind of show. Maybe there you can show yourself at least as a model? Maggie thought. Maybe you're right, if I can be useful. Eden said something about doing a maternity collection. Maybe she'll tag me in. Well, there you go. That's great. What's your other news? Nothing else. Maggie answered, but she lied. Maggie saw her mother yesterday. Stephanie had sent her to pick up another box. It seemed to be terribly expensive and exclusive costume jewelry for a new photo shoot. You, girl, are not stupid, she said to Maggie. But just to clear your conscience, if you lose it, Cassandra's going to take 3 hides, and she won't care that she's pregnant. Got it? Maggie nodded. The valuable cargo had to be picked up from the 9th floor of the luxury shopping center. The brand representatives had an office there. Maggie had never been here before and was curious about the expensive boutiques, the elegant fountain on the 1st floor, the beautifully dressed customers. It seemed to her that all the rich women dressed very stylishly. Only 2 out of 10 women seemed tastelessly dressed. Maggie found this curious. She picked up the box with no problem and decided to take the large transparent elevator downstairs. It traveled slowly, stopping at each floor, so there was a chance to see a little more of the world of wealth that was new to her. On the 7th floor, a whole flock of very young girls entered, all carrying a bunch of bags. Maggie pressed herself against the transparent back wall of the elevator and turned to face it to continue her observations. Suddenly, a woman caught her attention. She was coming out of some boutique, accompanied by 2 tall, almost identical men in black, obviously security guards. The woman was wearing a light white dress. Luxurious blonde hair flowed lightly over her shoulders, and her large blue eyes looked somewhere thoughtful in the distance. It was her mother, though she hadn't seen her in over a decade. She hadn't changed at all. Maggie's heart raced and her legs gave out. She almost dropped the precious box. The elevator passed very close to where the dazzling beauty in white and her guards were standing. And for a moment Maggie thought her mother looked at her, and even recognized her. Her face flashed with either amazement or fear, but the elevator was barely moving the whole way. And then, as if by surprise, it flew downwards with an arrow and did not stop until the 1st floor. The girls with the bags got out, followed by Maggie. She didn't know what to do, rush back upstairs and start looking for her mother all over the mall. But then a bout of nausea came over her, and she almost sprinted toward the exit for fresh air. She felt a little better outdoors, and she wondered maybe this woman just looked like her. And I only saw her for a few seconds. My brain, flooded with hormones and suffering from hypoxia in the stuffy elevator, saw blonde hair, blue eyes, and slipped me what I wanted to believe. Nevertheless, the episode was now constantly in her mind's eye. Toward the end of January, Maggie began to realize for the first time that she was pregnant. No, psychologically she understood it, but with her body she felt only her daughter's periodic movements, and all the things the other girls in the course had told her. And fatigue, weakness had bypassed her until that moment. Still, the term was not long, she became more noticeable. She didn't want to get up so early. It was harder to study. I wanted to lie down during the day. Yes, I've noticed, it's the first time, she said. Okay, Maggie, you need to regroup, focus on work, and do less housework. Who's going to do the housework? Do you work all the time too? She asked her friend. Why don't we invite Anastasia to visit for a month or 2? Maggie had met Anastasia's stepmother, Trixie. when she and her friend had gone to the village to celebrate New Year's Eve. She charmed everyone there. Stephen seemed to have literally fallen in love with her, and even regretted that he was leaving for a shift in a few days. The stepmother was unusually lively and friendly to the pregnant stepdaughter, showing unexpected warmth and care, and even the father was a little less somber than usual. Anastasia, Maggie tried to picture her stepmother in their city apartment. She wouldn't go. She has a household there, and her father won't let her go. She doesn't like the city. And she doesn't like me either. Her friend smiled slyly and averted her eyes. Maggie knew when to get that look. "Did you two make a deal behind my back?" she gasped. "Not exactly a deal," Trixie said evasively. "But before we left, we had this conversation. I told Aunt Anastasia that she could stay at my apartment if she wanted a break from country life. She was fine with it, and she was worried about you, by the way. Yeah, I could use the help, but taking it from your stepmother. Although there was no other option. All right, let her come." Inside, the girl was already prepared for the stepmother to annoy her with her reproaches, unsolicited advice and arguments, what Maggie does wrong and how it is necessary. But to her surprise, for the first 2 or 3 weeks the guest behaved quieter than water, but her help was very noticeable. Now Maggie could afford to get up an hour later. Breakfast and the obligatory container of lunch were already waiting for her on the table. In the evening they would flock back to the clean, cozy apartment, and even from the stairwell smelling the odor of homemade pies, or potatoes with mushrooms, or duck baked according to an old recipe. "Yes, Aunt Anastasia, don't you have to lose weight?" Maggie said cheerfully to her at dinner one night. "There's nothing unhealthy about it," she replied. "How do you know such recipes?" Maggie wondered. "Stephanie showed me how to look things up on the internet. I know that girls are watching their figure nowadays. And I read about pregnant women that it's bad for them to gain a lot of weight. It will be hard to give birth, and the baby will have a bad effect. So I started to look for a tasty and healthy way to feed you," Anastasia explained. "Thank you," Maggie said sincerely. The stepmother looked embarrassed. Her cheeks flushed a little, and she waved her hand away. "What else am I supposed to do all day? Just clean up and go to the store, that's all. It's boring just sitting around all day, so I'm looking for recipes." Suddenly, Maggie was seeing a different side of her stepmother. It was hard to understand what was the matter, whether she was finally resting from the hard country life, or from her heavy, silent husband. Either Maggie had grown up, and Anastasia no longer felt the need to teach her about life. As it turned out, her stepmother was a very caring and gentle woman who thought of others more than herself. Maggie realized, however, that she had always been like that. Anastasia had never neglected her stepdaughter, had never given her own son Stephen more than she did. Only she didn't know how to express her love and give affection, so necessary for a little girl growing up without a mother. Now she was interested in Maggie's life and work. Here is the edited text with dialogue highlighted and names replaced. At first secretly, furtively, she listened to Maggie tell her friend Stephanie about reading Coco Channel's biography and looking for transparent square buttons. Then she started sitting next to her, then asking Stephanie the meaning of words she didn't understand. And Aunt Anastasia became almost like a second friend. They somehow easily found a common language, and with the easy hand of her stepmother, Maggie began to read books and watch movies. And the two of them even went out for a walk or two from time to time, if Maggie was busy. It was the day of the spring collection of Cassandra Shvedova's fashion house. The whole previous week had blended into one interminably long, hectic day for Maggie. She probably wouldn't have survived without Anastasia's magic pies and chicken cutlets, even though they seemed to be going pretty much on schedule. And Maggie, on the other hand, had expected to rest for a couple days before the show. However, the experienced Alice told her at once, "It won't happen. You'll see a few days before the show Cassandra will have enough of a fit. She'll be thrashing around like a tornado, tearing everyone and everything to shreds and screaming that everything is wrong. Get ready." Maggie couldn't believe it. The supervisor looked completely calm, but everything happened just as Alice had predicted. In exactly 1 week, Maggie walked into the studio as usual, bringing the last 2 boxes of shoes, and barely managed to dodge a purse flying past her face. "No," Cassandra shouted. "This is all completely wrong. This is terrible. This was a bad idea in the first place. They look like cows in those dresses. No one's going to take it. My career will be over at this show. The house will go bankrupt. They'll turn this place into a beer stand. Judging by the helpers in the corners, she'd been raging for a long time. Only Alice stood steadfastly beside her boss, apparently trying to say something to Maggie. Clenching her palms into fists for courage, she approached Cassandra with an innocent smile. "Cassandra, let's try it on me now," Maggie suggested in a sweet voice. The warden lit a cigarette. "What's there to adjust? Only if you put all these rags in a pile and set them on fire," she snorted. Stephanie glanced quickly at her assistants, and as if on cue, they began to praise Cassandra's genius. She pouted and rolled her eyes like a little girl. "All scoundrels. Traitors," she muttered. But it was obvious the flattery had worked. "Well, Maggie, put on those overalls." As Maggie changed and walked down the makeshift catwalk, her boss's face turned even more sour than usual. Not that she said, "What's wrong? I can't figure out." Maggie plucked up her courage again and said, "The belt is unnecessary. It's supposed to emphasize the waist. Except I don't have one, and it divides my figure ridiculously into two unequal parts. If you took it off, it would make the look softer and smoother." "I say." Cassandra ripped off the sewn-in belt with a few ruthless movements. "Yes, that's it." So they tweaked the entire collection in the time they had left. Even so, Maggie still felt a growing excitement, even though she had practiced. It was scary to imagine that she, a heavily pregnant girl from Sacramento, would be walking down the runway in front of a room full of people today. "What do you have to be afraid of?" Stephanie encouraged her. "Your boss is a beast. Aren't you scared of her too? And walking the runway is just a walk." "I'm sorry, but this is Cassandra's night, not your recital. You'll be looked at as one of many models, nothing more. They'll be looking at her every look under a microscope, looking for flaws and scrutinizing every detail." That reassured Maggie. Indeed, her business is to go out 3 times, walk along the path in a series of similar pregnant girls, among whom there are not even professional models, and quietly go to rest. But Cassandra will have to endure all the critics, competitors, journalists, and just those who want to express their opinions. Trixie and Anastasia came to support the young debutante. As a thank you, Maggie had prepared their images for the show herself. Trixie sat in a long emerald green dress that set off her curly red hair, while Anastasia wore an elegant light beige pantsuit. She even straightened her back. And no one would think now that this woman had lived in Sacramento all her life tending cows and a vegetable garden. Maggie didn't even remember her first entrance. The hall in front of her eyes merged into one big blur, and she only mechanically stepped over her feet and kept a trained smile on her face. When she came backstage, Stephanie hugged her tightly. "Well done, Maggie, good girl. That was awesome. Hurry up and change for the second time out." The second time was already a little calmer. She even found Trixie and Anastasia in the third row with her eyes and smiled at them. At the same time, a vague uneasiness came over her. Maggie didn't understand what caused it. Her stomach didn't hurt, so it definitely wasn't related to the baby. She seemed to see something in the hall. But what? "Maggie, get changed quickly." "You're locking up," Stephanie shouted at her. For the third time, even though she was going the very last, Maggie was absolutely confident. The show was almost at an end, and judging by Cassandra's satisfied smile, it had gone great. She could tell from the audience's reaction that they were enjoying themselves. Her eyes slid to the front row, and Maggie almost stumbled when she saw a fragile blonde in a dazzling black dress. It was her, there could be no doubt now. Her mother was looking directly at her. Maggie herself didn't realize how she didn't faint or drop everything and run to her mother right off the stage. On autopilot, the girl finished her walkthrough, remaining on stage with the rest of the models. She even seemed to clap and smile when Cassandra came out, and the audience greeted her with a round of applause. But Maggie herself didn't take her eyes off the woman in the front row. Her mother recognized her, she certainly did. Barely waiting for them to get off the stage, Maggie ran without even changing her clothes. The guests from the show had moved on to the adjoining room where the buffet was to be held. Maggie squeezed her way through the guests. Someone recognized her, complimented her, but she heard nothing, looking for the familiar blonde hair and black dress in the crowd. "Mommy," she finally shouted. There was no doubt now. She really hadn't changed much in 12 years. Maybe her cheekbones were a little sharper, and her eyes a little harder. "Maggie," the woman said gently and touched her arm lightly. She looked more frightened than pleased. "Did you recognize me, Mom?" Maggie asked cheerfully. "Of course you did, my girl. How could I not recognize my little one, even though you've grown?" Her mother nodded at her belly with a smile. "Are you getting ready to be a mother? I was hoping you wouldn't have it as early as I did." "Early?" Maggie asked, perplexed. Her mother looked away. Apparently, she didn't want to draw attention to them. Somewhere in the distance loomed the vaguely familiar silhouettes of men in black. Maggie remembered that they were the guards who had been with her mother at the mall at the time. "Let's step back a little," her mother asked affectionately. They walked through the hall and out onto the covered balcony, where it was warm and empty. Mother sighed, rubbed her temples, and apparently determined to tell the story began. "I wasn't even 17 when you were born," she said. Maggie had never thought of her mother being so young. Eden didn't know that. "I only told him at the registry office," her mother continued. "He guessed about you later," she added quietly. "Figured what out?" Maggie asked, "and then realized I'm not his daughter?" The mother lowered her eyes. "Yes, I was very young then, silly, spoiled. My parents are very rich people. They never denied me anything. That must have played a part. When I became a teenager, I suddenly started to show character, drinking, smoking, going out with different bad guys. And then one day, I don't remember why, I had a fight with my parents and decided that I would run away from home and start a new life. I found a new friend and we started renting an apartment. I had money," the mother continued. "Then I found out I was pregnant, and that's when I met Eden. He was so simple, so honest, completely different from the guys I'd had before him. I decided it was the universe sending me a sign. And I left with him to Sacramento so my parents wouldn't find him. Got married." "Then you were born?" Maggie asked in a completely dry voice. Her mother looked at her guiltily and then averted her eyes. "I couldn't live there." The youthful fervor wore off quickly. "I realized I was too young to be anyone's wife, much less a mother." She suddenly took her daughter's hand, and she struggled to keep from tearing it away. "I tried, honestly," the mother continued. "If you knew how much I talked myself into staying every night. When you and Eden fell asleep, I'd look at you and say, 'Here they are, my family, my husband, my baby,' but I felt nothing. You were like guards keeping me in a cage I couldn't get out of." "Like guards?" Maggie asked, tears running down her cheeks. "And one day I just ran away," her mother continued, as if she hadn't heard her. "At first I wanted to leave a note, to explain everything to you and Eden, but I couldn't find the words." "In 12 years?" Maggie asked quietly. "You couldn't even send me a birthday card." Her mother lowered her head. "You went back to your parents? You didn't tell them about me?" Maggie asked. "No," replied the mother. "Do you know who my real father is?" She shrugged. "Honestly, I don't really remember anymore. I was going through a rough patch back then. And after I came back to the city, I never saw anyone else from that company." "Do you live with your parents now?" Maggie asked. Mom shook her head negatively and said very quietly, "No, with my husband." "Is that how he keeps me safe?" She shrugged her shoulders in an embarrassed sort of way. "He's a very rich man and very jealous," mother finished, lowered her lip, and said in a sort of pathetic, forgiving tone, "I'd really hate for him to find out about you." "You can't see me, can you?" Maggie shook her head negatively. Her mother suddenly perked up and smiled. "If you want, I'll introduce you to your grandparents. Oh, and you and I can see each other whenever you want." Then she looked back at the guards and added, "Well, maybe not very often, but I can call or write to you sometimes." "Is that what you want, Mom?" Maggie asked and looked her in the eye. Her mother looked both guilty and frightened at the same time. Maggie suddenly realized that she was not at all happy to see her daughter. She might have been glad at first, because she thought that now she would be relieved of the guilt that had been weighing on her shoulders for so many years. But now she seemed more afraid of what her rich new husband would think of her. Maggie averted her eyes, and through the glass door of the balcony she suddenly saw her stepmother, who appeared to be looking for her. Anastasia looked very agitated. Suddenly she turned her head and saw Maggie, and relief appeared on her face. And Maggie suddenly remembered vividly how she had gotten the flu when she was 11. She had had a fever of about 40, and her stepmother had stayed with her for 3 days, wiping her with a wet towel, drinking raspberry broth and broth, putting her big, cool, broad palm on her forehead. She also remembered the prom. Maggie had wanted to make her own dress then. She and her stepmother had gone to neighboring Vancouver and spent half a day at the market in the rain looking for the right fabric. When they finally found it, her stepmother haggled for a long time, knocking down the price. Then Maggie felt ashamed and embarrassed for Anastasia. It was only when she was paying that she noticed that her stepmother had taken the last of the money out of her purse. If she hadn't knocked down the price, they wouldn't have had enough for the purchase. Where had her own mother been all these years? Playing cranky daughter to her parents, who she hadn't even told they'd become grandparents. Her mother never grew up. She played family when she was young. When she got bored, she left her husband and daughter, easily tearing them out of her life, like a negligent student tears the spoiled sheets out of a notebook. Then she returned to her parents, pretending to be an innocent girl who had a little pity. Then found herself a new husband who would now cherish and protect her like the same little girl. How could she, Maggie, have been so blind all her life? You'll find Maddie twice more. The first time hard, then for real. It was now quite clear what those words meant. Maggie opened the glass door and stepped out to meet her stepmother. That's what you wanted to say, but you didn't have time, Maggie said as she hugged her tightly. What are you doing? Anastasia asked fearfully, gently stroking her stepdaughter's back. We lost you here. You were with some girl. Who is it, by the way? No one, Maggie answered firmly. Nobody. You picked a good name, Bogdana, Anastasia said, pushing the stroller with her granddaughter along the park path. God-given, just like her, all bright and smiling. Maggie smiled. Yes, her daughter was a delight to everyone around her. She had really been a quiet, sweet girl for 3 months. And Maggie had already started to go to work. Bogdana remained under the care of her grandmother and Aunt Trixie. A couple times she even took her daughter with her. Stephanie Swan suggested that Maggie take on the development of a children's clothing line after her vacation. So the boss said calmly, we've pretty much captured the maternity market after the spring show. It's only logical that they'll want to dress their children with us now. Maggie promised to think about the offer. After all, she's studying, albeit by correspondence, a child, a job. There's plenty to do. Of course, she couldn't have done it without Anastasia's help. Otherwise, it's been a joy. She didn't even go to Arizona for long, just to make sure her husband and the house were okay. And after a week there, she was asking to go back. Doesn't Eden miss you? Trixie asked her once. Anastasia shrugged her shoulders. Yeah, he's never been emotional with me. Even when we were married, he said, I'll help you raise your son, and you help me raise my daughter, and we'll keep the household in half. That's all love is. So I don't think she misses him. In the city, stepmother felt better and enjoyed walking with Maggie and her little granddaughter in the park. Maggie couldn't even call her stepmother. Oh, what a beautiful car. Suddenly, the woman said admiringly, pointing to a black Mercedes on the opposite side of the street. Maggie looked at it and shuddered. The car seemed very familiar to her. A second later, a tall and very handsome young man with piercing dark eyes stepped out of the Mercedes, accompanied by a long-legged brunette in a short dress. She recognized him immediately. For the first second, she couldn't even believe her sensations. To make sure, she pressed her hand to her heart. It was beating evenly. Her breathing didn't quicken. Her legs didn't shake. I didn't want to faint or run into his arms. Yeah, Maggie didn't feel anything for Taylor anymore. The past. Don't go back to the past. Look to the future, she said thoughtfully, caught Anastasia's puzzled look, smiled, turned away from the car, and rolled the stroller into the back of the park.